Jesus of Nazareth, a traveling teacher with no permanent home, no written book of his own, no formal rabbinical credentials that the religious establishment of his day would have recognized, stood on a hillside above the Sea of Galilee, looked out at a crowd of farmers and fishermen and tax collectors and tired mothers holding restless children, and instead of lecturing them about theology, instead of reciting the law, instead of delivering the kind of dense religious instruction they had come to expect from the men who claimed authority over their souls, he pointed at a farmer scattering seed in a nearby field and began to tell a story. That was his method. That was the thing that set him apart from every teacher who had come before him and every teacher who has come since. When Jesus wanted to change the way a human being thought, not merely inform them, not merely correct them, but reach down into the deepest machinery of how they understood God and themselves and the entire world, he did not hand them a doctrine to memorize. He told them a story about a sower or a lost coin or a father watching the road for a son who had broken his heart. He wrapped eternity inside the ordinary. He hid the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven inside images so common that a child could picture them and so deep that scholars have spent 2,000 years trying to reach the bottom of them and have not succeeded yet. The word we use for these stories is parable. It comes from the Greek parabole, which means, quite literally, to throw one thing alongside another, to lay a familiar picture beside an unfamiliar truth so that the light of the familiar illuminates the mystery of the unfamiliar. A parable takes something you already understand, a seed, a road, a wedding, a debt, a wandering sheep, and throws it down alongside something you do not yet understand, the nature of God, the shape of forgiveness, the economics of grace, the terrifying and beautiful reality of the kingdom of heaven. And in the collision between the two, something opens in the mind that could not have been opened any other way. And here is the thing that ought to stop us before we go a single step further. Jesus did not choose this method by accident. He did not tell stories because he could not manage abstraction or because his audience was too simple for anything more sophisticated. He told stories because stories do something that arguments cannot do. An argument can be resisted. You can hear a proposition, disagree with it, cross your arms, and walk away entirely unchanged. But a story slips past the guard. It gets inside before you realize what is happening. You are following along, picturing the field, imagining the son coming home, feeling the weight of the debt. And then, somewhere in the middle of it, the story turns, and suddenly you realize it is not about a farmer or a father or a debtor at all. It is about you. It has been about you the whole time. And by then, it is too late to defend yourself against it, because it is already inside, already doing its work, already changing the way you think. That is what we are going to do together over the next several hours. We are going to walk slowly, carefully, and thoroughly through 90 of the parables and teachings of Jesus, 90 stories and sayings and images that, taken together, form the most complete revolution of the human mind ever set in motion by one person. We are not going to rush. We are not going to skim across the surface and hand you a tidy list of moral lessons. We are going to sit with these stories the way they were meant to be sat with. We are going to walk into each one, look around, notice the details that most people miss, follow the turns, feel the reversals, and let each parable do to us exactly what it was designed to do, which is to dismantle, piece by piece, the way we have always thought, and to rebuild in its place something that can actually hold the weight of eternity. Because that is what these teachings do. They transform the way you think, not the way you behave first, the way you think, at the root, beneath the behavior. Jesus understood something that every genuine teacher eventually discovers. You cannot change what a person does until you change what a person believes to be true. And you cannot change what a person believes to be true by arguing at them. You have to reach underneath the argument, underneath the defenses, underneath the accumulated certainties of a lifetime, and plant something there, a seed, a story, an image, that will grow quietly in the dark until one day it breaks the surface and the person wakes up and realizes they no longer see the world the way they used to see it. 90 times over, that is what is about to happen. 90 seeds. 90 small, ordinary-looking stories, each one carrying inside it enough power to overturn a kingdom of assumptions you did not even know you were living inside. But before we take the first step onto that road, I want to pause and speak to you directly, because you did not arrive here by accident. You are watching this right now. And I do not believe that is a random event. There is a reason a person reaches for exactly this at exactly the moment they reach for it. Maybe you have been carrying a question you cannot answer. Maybe you have been circling the same worry for weeks, the same grief, the same low ache of feeling that something essential is missing even when you cannot name what it is. Maybe you simply woke up today with the sense that you needed to hear something true, something that would hold, something older and deeper than the noise of the world you live in. Whatever brought you here, I am glad you came. And I believe that over these next hours, in one of these 90 stories, there is a word waiting that was meant specifically for you. So let me ask you for one small thing before we begin, and I want to ask it plainly and without any pressure at all. If you have not yet subscribed to this channel, I would like to invite you to do that now. It is completely free. It costs you nothing, not a single cent, not even 30 seconds of your time. But here is what it means. When you subscribe, you make sure that the next teaching finds you, because there will be a next one and another after that. And I would hate for you to drift away and miss the very story that might have been the one you needed most. Subscribing gives you a steady place to return to, a fixed point you can come back to week after week in the good seasons and the hard ones, and know that something true will be waiting for you here. That is all I am asking. Just tap the subscribe button below this video, and that is all it takes. You will be part of what comes next. And while you are there, I would love to know what you are carrying into this teaching today. So in the comments below, drop a single word for the weight you are hoping to set down over these next hours. Not a paragraph, not an explanation, just one word. The fear, the grief, the question, the burden. One word for the thing you are quietly hoping God will lift as these stories do their work in you. You may be surprised what happens when you see how many other people wrote the very same word you did. Now, let us begin. Let your shoulders come down from around your ears. Let the noise of the day fall away for a while. And let the greatest teacher who ever lived begin, one story at a time, to change the way you think. Parable 1, the Sower. We begin where Jesus himself, in a very real sense, began, with the parable of the sower, the story he told to explain why some people are transformed by the truth and others are not, and which he then called the master key to all the other parables. Know ye not this parable? He asked his disciples afterward. And how then will ye know all parables? In other words, if you cannot understand this one, you will not understand any of them. This is the doorway. So we walk through it first. A sower went out to sow his seed. As he scattered it, and in that time a farmer sowed by hand, walking the field and casting the grain in wide arcs across the ground. Some of it fell by the wayside, on the hard-packed path at the edge of the field, and the birds came and devoured it. Some fell on rocky places where there was not much soil, and it sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun rose, it was scorched, and because it had no root, it withered away. Some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. And some fell on good ground and brought forth fruit, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Now notice the first thing, because most people rush past it. The seed is the same in every case. The sower does not change the seed depending on where it lands. He does not use inferior seed on the path and premium seed on the good ground. The same word of God goes out to every kind of heart. The difference, and this is the entire point, is not in the seed. The difference is in the soil. Jesus explains it himself, which he rarely does, and the fact that he explains this one tells us how foundational it is. The seed is the word of the kingdom, and the four soils are four conditions of the human heart when the word arrives. The wayside, the hard path, is the heart that has been walked over so many times that nothing can penetrate it anymore. The word lands on the surface and simply sits there, and before it can be understood, the birds come and take it away. Jesus says the birds are the evil one, snatching away what was sown before it can take root. You have met this heart. Perhaps you have been this heart. It is the person who hears the deepest truth in the universe and feels nothing, because the ground of their soul has been packed down hard by years of traffic, by disappointment, by cynicism, by the 1,000 small betrayals that teach a person to stop letting anything in. The rocky ground is different and in some ways more tragic because it looks at first like success. The seed springs up immediately. There is enthusiasm, emotion, a quick and joyful response. But underneath the thin layer of soil there is rock, and roots cannot go down into rock. So when the sun rises, and the sun always rises, meaning trouble comes, testing comes, the heat of real life comes, the plant that had no root simply withers. This is the heart that loves the feeling of truth, but has never let it cost anything, never let it go deep, never allowed it to reorganize the actual structure of a life. It is faith as a mood, rather than faith as a foundation. And when the pressure comes, the mood evaporates. The thorny ground is the one that ought to frighten the comfortable most of all, because these are not obviously bad hearts. The seed here is not stolen and not scorched. It grows, but it grows alongside thorns, and Jesus names the thorns precisely: the cares of this world, the deceitfulness of riches, and the desire for other things. The thorns do not attack the plant directly. They simply grow up beside it and crowd it out, competing for the same light and water and space, until the good plant is slowly, quietly, undramatically choked into unfruitfulness. Nobody decides to let their faith be strangled by their calendar and their bank account and their endless appetite for more. It happens gradually, in a way you can barely feel, until one day you notice that the thing that was once alive in you has been crowded out by 100 lesser things, none of which you would have chosen over it if you had ever been forced to choose openly. And then there is the good ground, the heart that hears the word, understands it, holds it fast, and brings forth fruit with patience. Notice that word, patience. The fruit does not come instantly. The good soil is not the soil that produces the fastest. That was the rocky ground, and it died. The good soil is the soil that endures, that holds the seed through the long, dark work of germination, that keeps faith through the season when nothing appears to be happening above the surface. And its yield is staggering, 30, 60, 100 times what was planted. Here is why Jesus called this the key to all the parables. Every parable that follows is a seed. Every one of the 90 stories we are about to walk through will be scattered into the soil of your heart. And this first parable is Jesus warning you, lovingly and directly, that the outcome will not depend on the quality of the stories. It will depend on the quality of your listening. The same words that transform one person leave another entirely unchanged. Not because the words were different, but because the ground was different. So the question this parable presses on us, before we go any further, is the most important question you can ask. What kind of soil am I? And the deeper hope buried inside the question is this: soil can be changed. Hard ground can be broken up. Rocks can be dug out. Thorns can be pulled. The condition of your heart when this teaching began does not have to be its condition when it ends. Parable 2. The weeds among the wheat. Jesus told them another. The kingdom of heaven, he said, is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone slept, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, the weeds appeared too. And the servants came to the owner and said, "Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? Where then did these weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he said, "because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. At the harvest, I will tell the reapers, 'First collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned. Then gather the wheat into my barn.'" The weed Jesus is describing was almost certainly darnel, a plant that in its early stages is nearly indistinguishable from wheat. Only when the heads form, when the grain matures, can you finally tell the difference between the true wheat and the counterfeit. And this detail is the whole heart of the parable, because it is speaking directly to one of the deepest and most anxious impulses of the religious heart, the impulse to purify, to separate, to root out the false right now, to build a perfect field with no weeds in it. Jesus says no, not yet. And his reason is astonishing in its patience. If you tear out the weeds now, while everything is still young and still tangled together at the roots, you will destroy wheat in the process. The zeal to eliminate all evil immediately does more damage than the evil it is trying to eliminate. This is a teaching that transforms the way you think about the mixed and disappointing world you actually live in. A world where the church is not pure, where your own heart is not pure, where good and evil grow up tangled together in the same field, and even, if you are honest, in the same person. The parable does two things at once. It restrains our judgment because we are not the ones who can reliably tell the wheat from the weed at this stage. We lack the sight to do it, and our attempts to do it violently tend to tear up what God intended to save, and at the same time it steadies our fear, because it promises that the mixture is not permanent. There is a harvest coming. There will be a separation. Justice is not abandoned. It is postponed to the only moment when it can be done without collateral destruction. The patience of God in letting the weeds grow is not indifference to evil. It is mercy toward the wheat, including perhaps the wheat you are still in the slow process of becoming. Parable 3. The mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, is like a grain of mustard seed, which a man took and sowed in his field, which indeed is the smallest of all seeds. But when it is grown, it is the greatest among herbs, and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and lodge in its branches. This is a parable about scale, and about the deceptive appearance of beginnings. The mustard seed was proverbially small, so small it was used as a figure of speech for the tiniest imaginable thing. And Jesus deliberately chooses it to describe the kingdom of God, which in his day looked like nothing at all, a carpenter and a handful of fishermen, no army, no temple, no treasury, no political power. If you had stood in Galilee in that moment, and someone had told you that this ragged movement would outlast the Roman Empire that was about to crucify its founder, you would have laughed. It looked like a seed. It looked like nothing. And that is exactly the point. The kingdom of God does not arrive the way the kingdoms of this world arrive, with noise and force and the overwhelming display of power. It arrives like a seed, small, hidden, easy to overlook, easy to dismiss. But inside the seed is a life that the observer cannot see, and that life is not in a hurry, and it does not need your approval to grow. Give it time, and the thing you dismissed as insignificant becomes large enough to shelter the birds of the air. This is a teaching that changes how you measure things. We are trained by the world to respect what is large, loud, and immediate, to assume that if something is small, it is unimportant, and if it is slow, it is failing. Jesus overturns that entirely. He says the most important reality in the universe began as the smallest thing in the field. And the application reaches all the way down into your own life. The small act of obedience you think no one noticed. The quiet prayer you assumed changed nothing. The tiny seed of faith you are almost embarrassed by because it feels so weak. Do not despise it. You are looking at a mustard seed. You have no idea what it is going to become. Parable 4. The leaven. He told them yet another, and this one is the twin of the mustard seed, but it works from the opposite direction. The kingdom of heaven, he said, is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened. If the mustard seed shows the kingdom growing upward and outward until it is visible to all, the leaven shows the kingdom working inward and invisibly until it has changed everything from within. Leaven, yeast, is hidden in the dough. You cannot see it working. There is no drama, no spectacle, no moment of obvious transformation. And yet it does not rest. Quietly, thoroughly, from the inside out, it permeates the entire lump of dough until there is not a single part of it left unchanged. Notice the quantity. 3 measures of meal. This is not a small batch. It is an enormous amount of flour, enough to feed a great many people, and a small amount of leaven transforms the whole of it. The disproportion is the point, the tiny cause, the total effect. This is how the kingdom works in a human life, and it is a teaching that brings enormous comfort to the impatient. When God begins his work in you, it very often does not look like anything. There is no lightning, no instant and total transformation of your character overnight. Instead, there is leaven, hidden in the dough of your ordinary days, working quietly through your thoughts and your habits and your reactions and your desires, and it does not stop, and it does not skip any part of you, and it will not be satisfied until the whole is leavened. If you feel that God's work in you is slow, this parable says, slow is not the same as stopped. The leaven is in the dough. It is working even now in the places you cannot see, and it will not leave a single part of you unchanged. Parable 5. The hidden treasure. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Picture it. A man is walking through a field, perhaps he's a hired laborer working ground that is not his own, and his plow strikes something. He digs, and there beneath the soil is treasure. In a world without banks, people buried their valuables in the ground for safekeeping, and when war or death or catastrophe interrupted, the treasure could remain hidden for generations, waiting. And this man has just found one such fortune, entirely by accident, in the middle of an ordinary day of ordinary labor. Now watch what he does, because Jesus is very precise about it. He covers it back up. And then, in his joy, the text is careful to tell us, in his joy, he goes and sells everything he owns to buy that field. Everything. His house, his tools, his savings, his security. All of it, gladly, without hesitation, because he has done the math, and it is not close. What he is giving up is nothing compared to what he is getting. Here is the transformation this parable works in the mind. We tend to think of following God as primarily a matter of sacrifice, of the things we give up, the pleasures we surrender, the costs we bear. And there is truth in that. But this man is not grimly sacrificing. He is not gritting his teeth and giving things up out of duty. He's selling everything in his joy because he has seen the value of the treasure, and the sale has become the easiest decision of his life. When the kingdom of God is truly seen for what it is, giving up everything else to have it stops feeling like loss and starts feeling like the best deal a person could ever make. The problem is never that the price is too high. The problem is always that we have not yet seen the treasure clearly enough to know what we are buying. Parable 6, the pearl of great price. And immediately Jesus tells its twin, "The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and bought it." At first, this looks identical to the hidden treasure, and the punchline is the same. A person sells everything to obtain the one thing of supreme worth. But there is a crucial difference in the setup, and the difference matters. The man in the field found his treasure by accident. He was not looking for it. He stumbled onto grace in the middle of an ordinary day. But the merchant here is a professional. He is searching. He has spent his whole life examining pearls, learning their worth, holding thousands of them up to the light, developing an eye for value that most people will never have. And precisely because he is an expert, when he finally sees the one pearl that surpasses all the others, he knows instantly what he is looking at. His entire life of searching has prepared him for the moment of recognition. Together, these two parables cover the two great ways that people come to the kingdom. Some come like the man in the field, surprised by grace, ambushed by God in the middle of a life that was not looking for him at all, stumbling onto the treasure by pure gift. And some come like the merchant, seekers, questioners, people who have spent years examining every philosophy and every religion and every proposed meaning of life, holding each one up to the light and finding it wanting, until at last they encounter Christ, and their trained eye knows immediately, this is the one. This is what all the searching was for. Whichever one you are, the accidental finder or the lifelong searcher, the response is the same. You sell everything. Not because you are forced to, but because once you have truly seen the pearl, everything else you owned has quietly become small. Parable 7, the dragnet. Once more, Jesus reaches for the sea because he is speaking to fishermen. The kingdom of heaven, he said, is like a net that was thrown into the sea and gathered fish of every kind. When it was full, the fishermen drew it ashore and sat down and sorted the good into containers, but threw away the bad. So it will be at the end of the age. The angels will come out and separate the evil from the righteous. This parable is the companion to the weeds among the wheat, and it makes the same essential point through a different image, which is Jesus' way of pressing a truth deep enough that it cannot be missed. The net, a great dragnet pulled behind boats, does not discriminate as it goes. It gathers everything, the good fish and the bad, the valuable and the worthless, all swept up together in the same haul, and it is only afterward, on the shore, that the sorting happens. The transformation here is a release from a burden you were never meant to carry. It is not your job in this present age to sort the net. The net is full of every kind, and it will remain full of every kind until the shore. The mixture is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is simply the nature of the age we live in. There is a sorting coming. And it will be thorough, and it will be just, and it will be done by hands far more capable of telling good from bad than yours or mine. Your task now is not to purify the sea. Your task now is to be found when the net is finally drawn ashore among the good. Parable 8. The unforgiving servant. Peter came to Jesus with a question that he clearly thought was generous. "Lord," he asked, "how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times. Peter thought he was being magnanimous. The rabbis of the day taught that forgiving someone 3 times was sufficient. So Peter more than doubled it and offered 7. And Jesus answered, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. And then, to make sure the number did not become a new rule to count toward, he told a story. A king wished to settle accounts with his servants, and one was brought to him who owed 10,000 talents. This is a deliberately absurd sum. A talent was worth about 20 years of a laborer's wages, so 10,000 talents was a debt of hundreds of thousands of years of labor. A number so large it was essentially infinite. A debt no human being could ever repay in 100 lifetimes. The servant could not pay, and the king ordered him and his family to be sold. But the servant fell on his knees and begged, "Have patience with me, and I will pay you everything." And the king, moved with compassion, did something the servant did not even ask for. The servant asked for time. The king gave him forgiveness. He released him and cancelled the entire unpayable, incomprehensible debt. And then that same servant went out and found a fellow servant who owed him 100 denarii, about 100 days' wages. A real debt, not a trivial one, but a debt that could actually be paid. A debt that was to the first debt, as a single drop is to the ocean. And he seized him by the throat and demanded payment. And when the man fell down and begged him with the exact same words he himself had used, "Have patience with me and I will pay you," the forgiven servant refused and threw him into prison until he should pay. When the king heard of it, he was furious. "You wicked servant," he said. "I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not also have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you?" And he handed him over to the jailers until he should pay all he owed. This is one of the most searching parables Jesus ever told, and it transforms the way you understand forgiveness by placing it in its true proportion. The debt you have been forgiven by God is the 10,000 talents, unpayable, incomprehensible, infinite. The debt anyone owes you, every wound, every betrayal, every genuine wrong done to you, and some of them are terrible and real, is the 100 denarii. Not nothing, but not the ocean either. And the parable says, with a bluntness that ought to make all of us go quiet, that the person who has truly grasped the size of their own forgiveness cannot then turn around and clutch at the throat of someone who owes them so infinitely less. Unforgiveness in this light is not merely a personal weakness. It is evidence that we have not yet understood the size of our own debt or the staggering mercy that cancelled it. Parable 9. The Good Samaritan. A lawyer stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he said, "what shall I do to inherit eternal life?" Jesus turned the question back to him. "What is written in the law?" And the man answered correctly, "Love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered right," Jesus said. "Do this, and you will live." But the man, wanting to justify himself, asked the question that has echoed through every attempt to limit the reach of love ever since. "And who is my neighbor?" In answer, Jesus told the most famous story in the world. A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, a real road, a steep and dangerous 17-mile descent through wilderness, notorious for robbers. And he fell among thieves, who stripped him and beat him and departed, leaving him half dead. Now by chance, a priest came down that road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. And likewise, a Levite, a temple official, came to the place, and saw him, and passed by on the other side. Two religious professionals, two men whose entire lives were organized around the service of God, and both of them saw the broken body in the ditch, and crossed to the far side of the road to avoid it. But a Samaritan, as he journeyed, came to where the man was, and when he saw him, he had compassion. And here we must stop, because the word Samaritan landed on Jesus' audience like a slap. Jews and Samaritans despised one another with a hatred that was centuries deep. For Jesus to make a Samaritan the hero of the story, to make the despised outsider the one who does the will of God, while the respected insiders fail, was a deliberate detonation of his listeners' entire moral framework. The Samaritan bound up the man's wounds, pouring on oil and wine. He set him on his own animal, walking so the wounded man could ride. He brought him to an inn and took care of him. And the next day he paid the innkeeper and said, "Take care of him, and whatever more you spend, I will repay you when I come back." He gave his time, his resources, his safety for a man of a people who would have despised him. Then Jesus turned the lawyer's question inside out. The man had asked, "Who is my neighbor?" A question designed to draw a line, to define the boundary of obligation, to establish who was outside the circle and therefore did not have to be loved. And Jesus refused the question entirely. He did not answer, "Who is your neighbor?" He asked instead, "Which of these three proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers?" Do you see the reversal? The lawyer wanted to know who qualified as the object of his love. Jesus told him to stop asking who deserves his love and to start being the kind of person who gives it. Neighbor is not a category of people you are required to serve. Neighbor is what you become when you show mercy. Go, Jesus said, and do likewise. Parable 10. The Prodigal Son. Of all the stories Jesus told, this is the one that has broken and remade more hearts than any other, and we must walk through it slowly because every detail is a doorway. A certain man had 2 sons, and the younger said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the estate that is coming to me." Understand what this request meant. The inheritance came at the father's death. To ask for it while the father was still alive was to say, in effect, "I wish you were dead. I do not want you, I want your things." It was an unspeakable insult, a wound aimed at the very heart. And the father, and here already the parable begins its work, gives it to him. He does not argue. He does not disown. He divides his living between them and lets the boy go. The younger son gathered everything and traveled to a far country, and there wasted his substance in reckless living. And when he had spent it all, a severe famine arose, and he began to be in want. He hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to feed pigs. And for a Jewish boy, tending swine was the lowest imaginable degradation, unclean animals in a foreign land. And he was so hungry he longed to fill his belly with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. And then comes the most important sentence in the story. He came to himself. In the pig pen, at the bottom, with nothing left, something woke up in him. "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare," he said, "and I perish here with hunger. I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me as one of your hired servants.'" He rehearses his speech. He is not even hoping to be a son again. He has given that up entirely. He is hoping only to be a servant, to earn his bread, to survive on the edge of a household he has forfeited every right to. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was yet a great way off, while he was still far down the road, still a small figure on the horizon, his father saw him, which means the father had been watching. Every day, scanning the road, waiting for a silhouette that might be his boy. And when he saw him, the father had compassion and ran. In that culture, a dignified older man did not run. It was undignified. He would have to gather up his robes and expose his legs and sprint like a servant. He did not care. He ran to his son and fell on his neck and kissed him. The son began his rehearsed speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you, and am no longer worthy to be called your son." But he never got to finish it. He never got to the part about being made a servant. The father interrupted the confession with celebration. "Bring the best robe and put it on him," he called to the servants. "Put a ring on his hand, the signet ring, the sign of restored sonship and authority, and shoes on his feet, for servants went barefoot and sons wore shoes. And bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." If the parable ended there, it would already be the greatest story ever told about the love of God for the person who has wandered as far as it is possible to wander. But it does not end there, because there is a second son, and Jesus told this whole story to a particular audience. The respectable religious people who were grumbling that he welcomed sinners and ate with them. The elder son was in the field, and as he came near the house, he heard music and dancing and asked what it meant. "Your brother has come," the servant said, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has received him safe and sound." And the elder brother was angry and would not go in. He stood outside the celebration, seething, and the father, the same father who ran down the road for the younger son, now came out again, this time to plead with the older one, and the elder son let it all pour out. "Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me even a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came," notice he will not say, "my brother." He says, "This son of yours, who has devoured your living with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Here is the heart of the older brother exposed. He has been in the father's house the whole time, but he has been living as a servant, not a son. "Years I have served you," he says. "I never disobeyed." He has kept all the rules and stored up a resentment that reveals he never understood the father's heart at all. He is scandalized by grace. He wants the younger brother to get what he deserves, and underneath that, though he cannot see it, he wants his own obedience to be a wage he has earned, rather than a relationship he has been freely given. And the father's answer to him is almost unbearably tender. "Son," he says, "child, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours." Everything the older son was working so hard to earn had been his the entire time, freely as a gift, if he had only had eyes to see it. "It was fitting to celebrate and be glad," the father says, "for this your brother," the father gently corrects him, "was dead and is alive, was lost and is found." And then Jesus does something devastating. He ends the story. He does not tell us whether the older brother went in. The door is left open, the invitation hanging in the air, the celebration going on inside, and the dutiful, resentful son standing in the dark of the yard with a choice to make. And Jesus hands that choice to everyone listening. Because the parable was aimed at the older brothers in his audience, the ones who had never left home and had never understood grace, and it is aimed at every one of us in whom the older brother still lives. Will you come into the feast where sinners are welcomed and the undeserving are embraced? Or will you stand outside in your righteousness, offended that the door is open to people who do not deserve it, never realizing that you never deserved it either, and that everything you were trying to earn has been yours as a gift the whole time? Parable 11. The lost sheep. Jesus told the parable of the prodigal son as the third in a trio. And to understand it fully, we must go back to the two that came before it, because all three were told to answer the same complaint. This man receives sinners and eats with them. The religious leaders were scandalized that Jesus sought out the very people they had written off. And so he told them three stories about the joy of finding what was lost. "What man among you," he began, "having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep which was lost.' Consider the math the world would do here. 99 is a good number. Losing 1 out of 100 is an acceptable rate of loss, a rounding error, the cost of doing business. Any reasonable shepherd would protect the 99 and write off the 1. But Jesus describes a shepherd who does the mathematically foolish thing, who leaves the 99 and goes into the wilderness after the single sheep that wandered, and does not stop searching until he finds it. This is not the arithmetic of the marketplace. This is the arithmetic of love, which does not average people out, which does not accept an acceptable rate of loss, which counts the one who is missing as though it were the only one that ever mattered. And when he finds it, he does not scold it, does not drive it home ahead of him with a stick as punishment for the trouble it caused. He lays it on his shoulders, carries it, and rejoices. Then Jesus delivers the line that reframes all of heaven. There is more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. The recovery of the one who was lost sets off a celebration in heaven itself. If you have ever felt like the one who wandered off, the one who is not worth the trouble of the search, this is Jesus telling you what God actually does. He comes after you. And when he finds you, heaven throws a party. Parable 12, the lost coin, the second story in the trio. What woman, having 10 silver coins, if she loses one, does not light a lamp and sweep the house and search carefully until she finds it? And when she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, "Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost." The lost sheep wandered off on its own. The coin did not. The coin was simply lost, dropped, rolled into a crack, swallowed by the dark of a dirt-floored house. It did nothing wrong. It was not rebellious. It was just lost. And it could not find its own way back. And it could not even cry out to be found. It could only lie there in the dark, waiting to see whether anyone valued it enough to look. And the woman lights a lamp and sweeps the whole house and searches carefully until she finds it. The image is intimate and domestic and thorough. She turns the house upside down for a single coin, because to her it is not a rounding error. It is a real loss and worth a real search. And when she finds it, she too calls the neighbors to rejoice. Together, the sheep and the coin teach us that lostness comes in more than one form. Some people are lost because they wandered, they made choices, took a road, walked away like the sheep and like the prodigal. But some people are lost through no fault of their own, dropped by circumstance, lost in the dark of a situation they did not create, unable even to call for help. And the message of both stories is identical. God searches for both kinds, the one who ran away and the one who was simply dropped. Both are sought. Both are worth the lamp and the labor. Both, when found, are the occasion of a celebration in the halls of heaven. Parable 13, the rich fool. Someone in the crowd called out, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus refused to be drawn into the dispute, but he used it to expose the thing underneath it. "Take heed," he said, "and beware of covetousness, for a man's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." And then he told a story. The ground of a certain rich man produced a great harvest, and he thought to himself, "What shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops." And he said, "This is what I will do. I will pull down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store all my grain and my goods. And I will say to my soul, 'Soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry.'" Listen to the language. In the space of a few sentences, he says "I" 6 times and "my" 5 times. There is no one else in his entire monologue. No neighbor, no poor man at his gate, no God, no gratitude, no thought of anyone but himself. His good fortune has not made him generous. It has made him more thoroughly alone with his own appetites. He is planning a retirement of pure self-consumption, and he imagines he has many years to enjoy it. But God said to him, "You fool! This night your soul is required of you, and the things you have prepared, whose will they be?" He thought he had years, he had hours. He thought the harvest had secured his future. In fact, he had no future at all beyond that night. And everything he had spent his life accumulating, everything he had defined himself by, everything he had trusted to make him safe, would in the morning belong to someone else, someone who had not worked for it, while his own soul stood before God with nothing. So is everyone, Jesus concludes, who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. The parable does not condemn the man for having a good harvest or even for being wealthy. It condemns him for a specific and very common form of foolishness, building his entire security on the one thing he could not keep and neglecting entirely the one thing he could not lose. The transformation this story works is a reordering of what we call wise. The world calls this man prudent. He saved, he planned, he built for the future. Jesus calls him a fool. because he prepared for every future except the one that was certain to come. Parable 14. The Rich Man and Lazarus. There was a rich man, Jesus said, who was clothed in purple and fine linen and feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate was laid a beggar named Lazarus, full of sores, who longed to be fed with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs came and licked his sores. Note a detail that Jesus' listeners would have caught immediately. The beggar has a name. In the parables, the named character is almost always the one who matters, and here Jesus inverts the world's ranking entirely. The rich man, who in life was somebody whose name everyone would have known, goes nameless through eternity. The beggar, whom no one noticed, whom people stepped over on their way through the gate, is called by name, Lazarus, which means God is my help. Heaven's records are kept differently than earth's. The beggar died and was carried by angels to Abraham's side. The rich man also died and was buried, and in torment he lifted up his eyes and saw Abraham far off and Lazarus at his side. And he called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue." Notice that even now, even in torment, the rich man still sees Lazarus as an instrument. Send Lazarus to serve me, to fetch me water, as though the beggar existed to run his errands. The posture of a whole lifetime does not dissolve at death. It is revealed by it. Abraham answered, "Child, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted, and you are in anguish. And between us and you a great chasm has been fixed, so that none may cross from here to you or from there to us." The gulf that the rich man had allowed to exist between himself and Lazarus in life, the gate, the table, the space between comfort and suffering that he never once crossed to close, has become in eternity a chasm that cannot be crossed at all. He created the distance. Now the distance is permanent. Then the rich man made one last request. "Send Lazarus to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, to warn them, lest they also come to this place." And Abraham said, "They have Moses and the prophets, let them hear them." But the rich man protested, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." And Abraham's reply is one of the most piercing lines in all the Gospels. "If they do not hear Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced if someone should rise from the dead." The problem was never a lack of evidence. The rich man had walked past Lazarus every single day. The truth had been lying at his gate, full of sores, the whole time. What he lacked was not information, but the will to see, and no additional miracle can cure a heart that has trained itself not to look. Parable 15. The 2 debtors. Jesus was invited to dine at the house of Simon, a Pharisee, and a woman of the city, a sinner, learned that he was there, and she came with an alabaster flask of ointment and stood behind him at his feet, weeping, and began to wet his feet with her tears and wipe them with her hair, and she kissed his feet and anointed them. The Pharisee watched with distaste and thought to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would know what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner." And Jesus, knowing his thoughts, told a small parable. A certain moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii, and the other 50. When they could not pay, he cancelled the debt of both. "Now which of them will love him more?" Simon answered, correctly, if reluctantly. "The one, I suppose, for whom he cancelled the larger debt." "You have judged rightly," Jesus said. And then he turned toward the woman, but spoke to Simon, and drew the comparison with quiet devastation. "Do you see this woman? I came into your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears. You gave me no kiss, but she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. Here is the transformation, and it cuts against the assumption almost everyone carries. We tend to think that the good religious person, the one with few obvious sins, has the advantage in loving God. Jesus says the opposite. The one who has been forgiven much loves much. The one who thinks he has been forgiven little loves little. Simon's problem was not that his debt was actually smaller than the woman's. His problem was that he did not know he had a debt at all. His respectability had blinded him to his need, and a person who does not know they have been rescued cannot love the rescuer. The woman wept at Jesus' feet because she knew exactly what she had been forgiven. Simon sat in cold judgment a few feet away because he thought he had nothing to be forgiven for. And the distance between them was the whole distance between a heart on fire with love and a heart that had never even been warmed. Parable 16, the two sons. What do you think? Jesus asked. A man had two sons. He went to the first and said, "Son, go and work in the vineyard today." And he answered, "I will not." But afterward he changed his mind and went. Then the father went to the second son and said the same thing, and he answered, "I go, sir," but he did not go. Which of the two did the will of his father? The answer is obvious, and Jesus made his audience say it out loud. The first, the one who said no but then went, not the one who said yes but never moved. Jesus told this to the chief priests and elders, the men who had said yes, sir, to God their entire lives, with their words, their robes, their public prayers, their scrupulous religion. And he told them that the tax collectors and prostitutes were entering the kingdom of God ahead of them, because the tax collectors and the prostitutes were the first son. They had said no to God with their lives loudly for years, and then they had changed their minds and come, and the religious leaders were the second son. They had said yes with every outward form and every public word, and then never actually done the will of the Father at all. This parable transforms the way you weigh words against actions. It is a warning to everyone who has ever mistaken saying the right thing for doing it, who has confused the language of obedience with obedience itself. Heaven is not moved by the son who says, "I go, sir." Heaven is moved by the son who goes, and it holds out enormous hope for anyone who has spent years saying no, because the story says plainly that the first son, the one who refused, is the one who ended up doing the Father's will. It is never too late to change your mind and go into the vineyard. Parable 17, the wicked tenants. Hear another parable, Jesus said, and this one he aimed like an arrow straight at the religious authorities standing in front of him. A landowner planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a wine press, built a watchtower, and leased it to tenants, and went into another country. When the harvest approached, he sent his servants to the tenants to collect his fruit. But the tenants took his servants and beat one, killed another, and stoned a third. He sent more servants, more than the first, and they did the same to them. The vineyard in the scriptures his listeners knew by heart was Israel. The landowner was God. The servants were the prophets, sent again and again across the centuries, and rejected, beaten, and killed again and again. Jesus is telling the history of God's patience and Israel's leadership in a single unfolding story, and everyone listening knew exactly what he was doing. Finally, the landowner said, "I will send my son. They will respect my son." But when the tenants saw the son, they said among themselves, "This is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance." And they took him and cast him out of the vineyard and killed him. Jesus is standing in the temple, days from his own death, telling the men who are about to kill him precisely what they are about to do and why. They want the vineyard without the owner. They want the inheritance without the heir. They want God's blessings without God's authority over them. When therefore the owner of the vineyard comes, Jesus asked, "What will he do to those tenants?" And again he made them pronounce their own verdict. "He will bring those wretches to a miserable end," they answered, "and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the fruit in their seasons." And Jesus quoted the scripture back to them. "The stone which the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. The very one they threw away is the one on whom everything would be built." The parable is a sober warning that runs through all of history. God entrusts his vineyard, he looks for fruit. And those who seize his gifts while rejecting his authority, who want everything from God except God himself, will find in the end that the vineyard is given to those who will actually bear its fruit. Parable 18, the wedding feast. "The kingdom of heaven," Jesus said, "is like a king who gave a wedding feast for his son. He sent his servants to call those who were invited, but they would not come. Again, he sent other servants, saying, 'Tell those who are invited, see, I have prepared my dinner. My oxen and my fat calves are killed. Everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast.' But they paid no attention and went off, one to his farm, another to his business, and the rest seized his servants, treated them shamefully, and killed them." The invitation is to a feast, to joy, to celebration, to the wedding of the king's own son. And the astonishing thing is not that some people are turned away. The astonishing thing is that people invited to a royal wedding simply do not come. They are not prevented by hardship or barred by poverty. They are too busy. One goes to his farm, another to his business. The kingdom is refused not by dramatic wickedness, but by ordinary preoccupation, by people who have somewhere else to be, something else to tend, a life too full of good and legitimate things to make room for the one invitation that mattered most. So the king said to his servants, "The wedding feast is ready, but those invited were not worthy. Go therefore to the main roads and invite to the wedding feast as many as you find." And the servants went out and gathered all whom they found, both bad and good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. The doors are thrown open to the highways and the hedgerows, to everyone the first guests would have looked down on. And the hall fills at last with the unlikely, the overlooked, the ones who had no prior claim and no busy schedule too important to interrupt, the ones who simply came when they were called. There is a sharp, final scene. A man is found at the feast without a wedding garment, and he is cast out. This has troubled many readers, but the point is this. In that culture, wedding garments were customarily provided by the host to the guests. To be without one was not poverty. It was refusal. It was to have come to the feast while rejecting the covering the king himself offered. And so the parable holds two truths in tension that we must hold together. The invitation is breathtakingly, scandalously wide. Bad and good alike are swept in from the streets. And yet coming on your own terms, refusing the garment the king provides, is still to have not really come at all. Many are called, Jesus concludes, but few are chosen. Parable 19, the 10 virgins. Then Jesus said, "The kingdom of heaven will be like 10 virgins who took their lamps and went to meet the bridegroom. 5 of them were foolish, and 5 were wise. The foolish took their lamps, but took no oil with them, while the wise took flasks of oil along with their lamps. As the bridegroom was delayed, they all became drowsy and slept." Notice, all 10 fell asleep, the wise and the foolish alike. The difference between them was not that the wise stayed awake and the foolish did not. Sleeping was not the failure. The difference was the oil. The wise had prepared for a delay they could not predict. The foolish had prepared only for the best-case scenario, only for a bridegroom who came on time. At midnight there was a cry, "Here is the bridegroom, come out to meet him." Then all those virgins rose and trimmed their lamps. And the foolish said to the wise, "Give us some of your oil, for our lamps are going out." But the wise answered, "There will not be enough for us and for you. Go rather to the dealers and buy for yourselves." And while they went to buy, the bridegroom came, and those who were ready went in with him to the marriage feast, and the door was shut. And here is the sobering heart of it. The oil could not be borrowed, and it could not be bought at the last minute. There are things in the spiritual life that cannot be transferred from one person to another, and cannot be acquired in the final moment of crisis. A lifetime of walking with God, the reservoir of faith built up in the quiet, ordinary days, the oil of a real and personal relationship. These cannot be borrowed from someone else's supply when the midnight cry comes. The wise are not being selfish when they refuse to share. They are stating a spiritual impossibility. You cannot live on someone else's faith. The transformation here is a call to prepare now, in the ordinary and undramatic present, for a moment whose hour you do not know. To fill the flask while there is still time, so that whenever the cry comes, you are ready. Parable 20. The talents. For it will be like a man going on a journey, Jesus said, who called his servants and entrusted to them his property. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, each according to his ability. Then he went away. A talent was an enormous sum, so even the servant with 1 had been trusted with something of real value. The one who had received 5 talents went at once and traded with them and made 5 more. So too the one with 2 talents made 2 more. But the one who had received 1 talent went and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. He did nothing with it. He did not lose it. He did not squander it. He buried it and waited and kept it safe and did nothing. After a long time, the master returned and settled accounts. The one who had made 5 more came and presented them, and the master said, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a little, I will set you over much. Enter into the joy of your master." And the one with 2 more heard exactly the same words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Notice that the reward was identical, because faithfulness, not raw output, was what the master measured. The man with 2 was as fully commended as the man with 5, because both had done all they could with what they were given. Then the one who had received the single talent came, and his words reveal everything. "Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here it is. You have what is yours." His problem was not laziness first. It was a wrong picture of the master. He believed the master was harsh, exacting, impossible to please, and that belief produced fear, and the fear produced paralysis, and he buried the gift rather than risk it. And the master condemned him not for losing money, but for doing nothing at all with what he had been given, out of a fear that misjudged the giver entirely. This parable transforms the way you think about the life entrusted to you. You have been given something, abilities, resources, time, opportunities, a particular set of gifts, each according to his ability. You're not asked to have as much as the next person. The man with 2 was not faulted for not having 5. You are asked only to use faithfully what you were actually given, rather than to bury it in the ground out of fear. And the great enemy of a fruitful life, this story says, is not failure. It is the fear that keeps you from ever putting your gift to work at all. Parable 21, the laborers in the vineyard. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus said, is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. He agreed with them for a denarius a day and sent them in. And he went out again about the 3rd hour and saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he sent them too, promising to pay them whatever was right. He did the same at the 6th hour and the 9th hour, and about the 11th hour, the very end of the working day, with barely an hour of light left. He found still others standing idle and asked, "Why do you stand here idle all day?" "Because no one hired us," they said. And he sent them into the vineyard too. When evening came, the owner told his foreman to pay the workers, beginning with the last and ending with the first. And those hired at the 11th hour came, and each received a denarius, a full day's wage for 1 hour of work. So when the first came, they assumed they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And they grumbled, "These last worked only 1 hour, and you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat." The landowner answered one of them, "Friend, I am doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity?" This is one of the parables most likely to offend our sense of fairness, and that offense is precisely the door it opens. Everything the first workers received was exactly what they had agreed to and exactly what was just. Their complaint is not that they were cheated, they were not, but that others were treated generously. And that exposes something in the human heart that we would rather not see. We can be perfectly content with grace until we watch it given to someone who, in our accounting, deserves it less than we do. The kingdom does not run on the economy of wages, where you get precisely what you earn and no more. It runs on the economy of grace, where the landowner is free to be generous, where the one who came at the 11th hour receives the same welcome as the one who came at dawn. If that offends us, the parable gently suggests, it is because we still think we are owed something, and we have not yet understood that everyone in the vineyard, first and last alike, is living on gift. Parable 22. The Friend at Midnight. Jesus taught his disciples to pray, and then he told them a small, almost comic story to teach them how to keep praying. "Suppose one of you has a friend," he said, "and goes to him at midnight and says, 'Friend, lend me 3 loaves, for a friend of mine has arrived on a journey, and I have nothing to set before him.' And the man inside answers, 'Do not bother me. The door is now shut, and my children are with me in bed. I cannot get up and give you anything. Picture the scene. It is midnight. A traveler has arrived unexpectedly, and hospitality in that culture was a sacred, unbreakable duty. To have nothing to offer a guest was a genuine shame. So the desperate host goes next door and knocks, and keeps knocking, long after any reasonable person would have given up and gone home embarrassed. 'I tell you,' Jesus said, 'though he will not get up and give him anything because he is his friend, yet because of his persistence, he will rise and give him whatever he needs.' Then Jesus drew the lesson, 'Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you.'" Now this parable is easy to misread, so we must be careful. Jesus is not saying that God is like the reluctant sleeper who must be pestered awake and worn down before he will grudgingly help. Jesus is arguing from the lesser to the greater, as he often does. If even a grumpy neighbor, roused from sleep and annoyed, will finally get up and help simply to stop the knocking, how much more will your Father in heaven, who never sleeps, who loves you, who is not annoyed by your coming, respond to the one who keeps asking? The point is not that God is reluctant. The point is that you should not be. The parable is a permission and an encouragement to keep coming, to keep asking, to bring your midnight need to the door and knock and not lose heart. Because the one on the other side of this door is not a reluctant neighbor, but a loving Father. Parable 23. The Persistent Widow. Jesus told them a parable to the same end, that they ought always to pray and not lose heart. In a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor respected man. And there was a widow in that city who kept coming to him and saying, "Give me justice against my adversary." For a while he refused, but afterward he said to himself, "Though I neither fear God nor respect man, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will give her justice, so that she will not wear me out by her continual coming." A widow in that world was among the most vulnerable people alive. No husband to protect her, no standing to demand anything, no money to bribe the system that was supposed to defend her. She had nothing but her own voice and her own refusal to stop using it. And against a corrupt judge who cared for neither God nor man, she had exactly one weapon: persistence. She simply would not go away. She came and came and came again until the unjust judge granted her justice for no other reason than to be rid of her. And the Lord said, "Hear what the unrighteous judge says. And will not God give justice to his elect who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will give justice to them speedily." Once again, the argument runs from the lesser to the greater. If even a corrupt, godless judge will finally deliver justice to a persistent widow simply to stop being bothered, how much more will a good and loving God deliver justice to his own children who cry out to him day and night? The transformation is in how we understand the silences of God, the seasons when the answer is delayed and heaven seems not to hear. This parable says, do not read delay as refusal. Do not let the waiting convince you that no one is listening. Keep coming. Keep crying out. The widow's power was not her strength, but her refusal to quit. And Jesus holds her up not as a warning about a reluctant God, but as a picture of the kind of persistent, unwearying faith that keeps knocking on heaven's door until the answer comes. Parable 24, the Pharisee and the tax collector. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. Notice that his prayer is addressed to God, but is really about himself. It contains no request, no confession, no need, only a catalogue of his own superiority, propped up by comparison to the man praying a few feet away. He does not so much pray as perform an inventory of his virtues, and he uses another human being as the low bar against which to measure his own height. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. That is the entire prayer. 7 words in the English, even fewer in the Greek. No resume, no comparison, no achievements. Just a man who knows exactly what he is and throws himself entirely on the mercy of God. I tell you, Jesus said, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. The tax collector, a genuine sinner, a collaborator with the occupying enemy, a man the Pharisee had every technical reason to look down on, went home right with God. The Pharisee, who had done everything correctly, did not. Because the one thing that makes a person unreachable by grace is the conviction that they do not need it. This parable transforms the way you approach God entirely. You do not come to him with your resume. You do not come by being better than the person next to you. You come as the tax collector came, with empty hands, an honest heart, and one true prayer, God, be merciful to me. And that prayer, Jesus promises, is never refused. Parable 25. The Great Banquet. A man once gave a great banquet and invited many. And at the time of the banquet he sent his servant to say to those who had been invited, Come, for everything is now ready. But they all alike began to make excuses. The first said, I have bought a field and I must go out and see it. Please have me excused. Another said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I go to examine them. Please have me excused. And another said, I have married a wife, and therefore I cannot come. Listen to the excuses, because they are not evil things. A field, oxen, a marriage, these are ordinary, legitimate, even good parts of a human life. No one refuses the banquet for the sake of some great wickedness. They refuse it for the sake of property and business and family, good things that have quietly become more important than the invitation. This is how most people miss the kingdom, not by choosing evil over God, but by letting good things fill every seat until there is no room left for the best thing. So the servant reported this to his master, and the master of the house became angry and said, "Go out quickly to the streets and lanes of the city, and bring in the poor and crippled and blind and lame." And when there was still room, he said, "Go out to the highways and hedges and compel people to come in, that my house may be filled. The ones who are too busy, too comfortable, too full of their own concerns to come, are replaced at the table by the ones who had nothing, the poor, the disabled, the outsiders, the people with no field and no oxen and no competing claim on their attention, who had every reason to say yes because they had nothing holding them back. For I tell you," the master concludes, "none of those men who were invited shall taste my banquet. The table will be full. The only question the parable leaves hanging is whether you will be too busy with good things to take your seat." Parable 26. The tower builder and the king going to war. Jesus never hid the cost of following him. And in two quick-paired images, he made sure no one signed up without knowing what they were agreeing to. "Which of you," he asked, "desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, 'This man began to build and was not able to finish.' And the second, what king, going out to encounter another king in war, will not sit down first and deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet the one who comes against him with 20,000? And if he cannot, he sends a delegation and asks for terms of peace, while the other is yet a great way off. These are not parables meant to discourage. They are parables meant to make discipleship honest. Jesus is the rare leader who actively tells the crowds to think hard before they follow him, to sit down and count the cost, to make sure they understand that this road is not a burst of enthusiasm, but a whole life commitment. The half-built tower, abandoned when the money ran out, is a picture of the faith that begins in excitement and collapses when it turns out to cost something real. The rocky ground of the very first parable all over again. Jesus wants builders who finish. He wants followers who have counted the cost and chosen him anyway, with their eyes open, knowing exactly what they are laying down. Because a faith that has counted the cost in advance is a faith that will still be standing when the cost finally comes due. Parable 27. The barren fig tree. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. And he said to the vine-dresser, "Look, for 3 years now I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and I find none. Cut it down. Why should it use up the ground? 3 years is a reasonable time to wait for a fig tree to produce. The owner's patience is not unreasonable. His verdict is not cruel. The tree is taking up soil, drinking water, occupying space in the vineyard, and giving nothing back. By every fair standard, its time is up." But the vine-dresser answered, "Sir, let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and put on manure. Then if it bears fruit next year, well and good. But if not, you can cut it down." Here is the heart of the parable, the intercessor who stands between judgment and the fruitless tree and pleads for more time. "Give it 1 more year. Let me work the soil. Let me tend it. Let me do everything that can be done. And then, if there is still nothing, so be it." The parable holds 2 truths that our age likes to separate. There is real patience, extraordinary, gracious, intervening patience that pleads for another season and rolls up its sleeves to give the tree every possible chance. And there is a real limit. The year is granted, but it is 1 year, and the expectation of fruit does not disappear. God's patience is not the same as God's indifference. He tends, he waits, he digs around the roots of a fruitless life and gives it every advantage. And he also genuinely desires fruit, and the season of grace, though real and generous, is not endless. The mercy in this parable is not that the tree is never expected to bear fruit. It is that when it deserved to be cut down, a voice interceded and said, "Give it one more year." And that voice, we may be sure, is still interceding. Parable 28, the unjust steward. This is one of the strangest parables Jesus told, and it rewards careful attention. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this manager was wasting his possessions. So he called him in and said, "What is this I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager." The manager, about to be fired, said to himself, "What shall I do? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg." And then he devised a shrewd plan for his future. He called in his master's debtors one by one. To the first he said, "How much do you owe my master?" 100 measures of oil, the man answered. "Take your bill," the manager said. "Sit down quickly and write 50. To another, "How much do you owe?" 100 measures of wheat. "Take your bill and write 80. He used his last hours of authority to reduce the debts of his master's debtors, buying himself friends who would welcome him into their homes once he was out of a job. And here is the surprise. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. Not for his dishonesty, Jesus is careful, but for his shrewdness, his foresight, his decisive use of the present moment to prepare for the future. For the sons of this world, Jesus observed, are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And then the application: make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous wealth, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings. The point is not that we should be dishonest. The point is a piercing question. Why are people so often more clever, more strategic, more forward-thinking about money and worldly security than they are about eternity? The manager, facing the loss of his position, acted decisively to secure his future. Jesus asks, will you be at least as wise about your eternal future as this scoundrel was about his earthly one? Use what you have been given, your resources, your time, your money, all of which will one day fail, to invest in what lasts forever. Even a dishonest man understood that the present is the moment to prepare for what is coming. How much more should those who know where they are going? Parable 29, the unprofitable servants. Will any one of you, Jesus asked, who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep, say to him when he has come in from the field, "Come at once and sit down at table"? Will he not rather say to him, "Prepare my supper and dress properly, and serve me while I eat and drink, and afterward you will eat and drink"? Does he thank the servant because he did what was commanded? Then Jesus turned it toward his disciples. So you also, when you have done all that you were commanded, say, "We are unworthy servants. We have only done what was our duty." This is a hard word, and it is meant to be because it cuts directly at a subtle spiritual pride that even sincere and hard-working believers fall into. The quiet expectation that our obedience puts God in our debt, that our good works accumulate as credit we can present, that having done what was asked, we have earned a special standing. Jesus dismantles it. When you have done everything, you have still only done your duty. You have not placed God under obligation. There is no surplus of merit that God now owes you for, and far from being a crushing word, this is actually a liberating one, because it frees you from the exhausting bookkeeping of the earned life. You are not laboring to build up a balance that puts God in your debt. You serve because you belong to Him, because it is your joy and your duty, and everything that comes back to you from His hand comes not as wages owed, but as grace given. The servant who understands this is free. The servant who thinks God owes him will spend his whole life keeping a ledger and be perpetually disappointed that the accounts never seem to balance in his favor. Parable 30, the sheep and the goats. This is the last of the great parables Jesus told before his arrest, and it is less a story than a vision of the final judgment, and it transforms the way you understand where Christ is to be found in this world. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, Jesus said, "And all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he will separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats, placing the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me.' And here is the astonishing turn. The righteous are confused. They do not remember doing any of this for the king. 'Lord,' they ask, 'when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and visit you?' And the king answers, 'Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me.'" There it is. The transformation that reorders how you see every human being you will ever encounter. The king identifies himself with the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned. He is hidden in the least of these. When you fed the hungry person, you were feeding Christ. When you visited the prisoner, you were visiting Christ. The face of every suffering, overlooked, discarded human being is a face behind which Christ himself is somehow present. And what you do or fail to do for them, you do or fail to do for him. And notice too that the righteous did not know. They did not perform their kindness in order to earn a reward or to be seen serving Christ. They simply loved the people in front of them, and only at the end discovered whom they had been serving all along. To those on the left, the king says the reverse, that in ignoring the least of these, they had ignored him. Both groups are surprised. The difference between them was never in their theology or their knowledge. It was in what they did with the suffering person right in front of them, in whom Christ was hidden the whole time. Parable 31, the two foundations. Jesus ended the greatest sermon ever preached with a story about two builders, and he told it to make one thing unmistakably clear: hearing his words is not the same as building on them. "Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them," he said, "will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall, because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was its fall." Notice what is the same in both cases. Both men build a house. Both houses presumably look fine on a clear day. You cannot tell from the outside which one is on rock and which is on sand. And both face the same storm. The rain, the floods, the winds come equally to both. The storm is not a punishment aimed at the foolish builder. It is simply what happens to every house and every life eventually. The difference is not in the weather. The difference is in the foundation, and the foundation is invisible until the storm reveals it. And here is the razor-sharp point Jesus is making, the reason he ends his sermon this way. The difference between the two men is not that one heard his words and the other did not. Both heard. Both men in the parable hear these words of mine. The difference is that one heard and did them, and the other heard and did not. It is entirely possible to listen to the teachings of Jesus. even to enjoy them, admire them, be moved by them, watch 90 of them unfold in a single sitting, and to build your house on sand the whole time, because hearing was never the point. Doing was the point. The storms will come to every life without exception, and when they come, the only thing that will hold is a life that did not merely admire the words of Jesus, but actually built on them. Parable 32. New wine in old wineskins. No one, Jesus said, puts new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins, and the wine will be spilled and the skins destroyed. But new wine must be put into fresh wineskins. In that world, wine was stored in skins, and a new skin was supple and could stretch as the wine fermented and expanded. But an old skin had already stretched to its limit and grown brittle. Pour fermenting new wine into a rigid old skin, and the pressure of the new life would split it apart, and both would be lost. Jesus was speaking about what he had come to bring. The new wine is the gospel, the fresh and expanding life of the kingdom, and it cannot simply be poured into the old, rigid, brittle forms of a religion that had hardened into mere rule-keeping. It requires new skins, new hearts, renewed minds, structures flexible enough to hold and stretch with the living thing being poured into them. This is a teaching that transforms the way you receive what God is doing, because it warns against a particular danger, trying to contain the living, growing work of God inside the brittle forms of the way things have always been done. Some of us pray for God to pour new wine into our lives while refusing to become new skins to hold it, clinging to old rigidities, old resentments, old brittle certainties that cannot stretch. The wine God pours is always alive and always expanding. The question is whether we are willing to become supple enough to hold it. Parable 33. The patched garment. Paired with the wineskins is a second brief image. No one, Jesus said, tears a piece from a new garment and puts it on an old one. If he does, he will tear the new, and the piece from the new will not match the old. The point is closely related but distinct. You cannot patch the old life with a piece of the new. The gospel is not a patch, not a small improvement stitched onto the existing fabric of a life, otherwise left unchanged, a bit of religion added to make the old garment last a little longer. When you try to use Christ as a patch on an unchanged life, two things are ruined. You damage the new by tearing it up to fit the old, and the patch does not hold anyway because the new and the old shrink and pull against each other. Jesus did not come to improve your old life. He did not come to add a religious patch to a garment that was fine, except for one worn spot. He came to make all things new, a whole new garment, not a patched old one. And this transforms the way you think about what following him actually requires. It is not the addition of a little faith to an otherwise unchanged existence. It is a new garment altogether. Parable 34. The lamp under a basket. You are the light of the world, Jesus said. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. Let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. A lamp exists for one purpose: to be seen, to give light, to push back the darkness in a room. To light a lamp and then cover it with a basket is an absurdity. It defeats the entire reason the lamp was lit. And yet Jesus says, this is exactly what many of his followers do with the light they have been given. They hide it. Out of fear, out of self-consciousness, out of a false humility that is really just a reluctance to be seen, they take the light that was meant to guide others through the dark and they put a basket over it. But notice the aim of the shining. Let your light shine, Jesus says, so that they may glorify your Father, not so that they may admire you. The light is not lit to draw attention to the lamp. It is lit to illuminate the room and point beyond itself to the God who is its source. This transforms the way you think about your own visibility and influence. The good you do, the faith you carry, the light you have been given, it was never meant to be hidden, and it was never meant to be about you. It was meant to shine openly in a way that helps others find their way and leads them to praise not you, but the one who lit the lamp in the first place. Parable 35. The speck and the log. "Why do you see the speck that is in your brother's eye," Jesus asked, "but do not notice the log that is in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when there is a log in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye." The image is deliberately absurd, almost comic, and the comedy is the point. Picture a man with an entire wooden beam protruding from his own eye, squinting and peering as he tries to perform delicate surgery on the tiny fleck of sawdust in someone else's. It is ridiculous. And Jesus means it to be ridiculous because he is holding up a mirror to one of the most universal human failings, our extraordinary ability to see the small faults of others in high definition while remaining completely blind to the enormous faults in ourselves. Notice that Jesus does not say, "The speck is nothing." There is a speck, the brother's fault may be real, but the parable insists on an order of operations that the critical heart always wants to skip. First the log, then the speck. First deal ruthlessly with your own faults, and only then will you see clearly enough, and crucially, humbly enough, to help your brother with his. This transforms the way you approach the failings of other people. It does not forbid all correction. It forbids the hypocritical correction that magnifies the small sins of others while ignoring the large ones at home. The person who has honestly dealt with the log in their own eye approaches everyone else's speck differently, gently, humbly, as one patient reaching toward another, rather than as a judge with a beam in his eye pretending to be a surgeon. Parable 36. The narrow and wide gates enter by the narrow gate, Jesus said. For the gate is wide, and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. But the gate is narrow, and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. Jesus presents two gates, two roads, two destinations, and two crowds. One gate is wide, and the road beyond it is broad and easy, and it is crowded, thronged with travelers, because the wide gate asks nothing of you, and the broad road accommodates every appetite and every direction. The other gate is narrow, and the road beyond it is hard, and few find it. This is a teaching our culture instinctively resists, because we are trained to assume that whatever is most popular must be most right, that the crowd is a reliable compass, that if everyone is going a certain way, it must be the way to go. Jesus says the opposite. The breadth and popularity of a road tells you nothing good about where it ends. The wide gate is wide precisely because it demands no repentance, no self-denial, no reorientation of a life. You can walk through it exactly as you are, carrying everything, and so nearly everyone does. The narrow gate is narrow because you cannot bring everything through it. You cannot carry your pride and your self-sufficiency and your determination to be your own God through a narrow gate. You have to lay things down to fit. This transforms the way you evaluate your own direction. Do not measure your path by how many others are walking it. Measure it by where it leads. The hard, narrow way that few travel is the one that opens onto life. Parable 37. The wise and faithful servant. Who then is the faithful and wise servant, Jesus asked, whom his master has set over his household, to give them their food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly, I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But suppose that servant is wicked and says to himself, My master is delayed, and he begins to beat his fellow servants and to eat and drink with drunkards. The master of that servant will come on a day he does not expect, and at an hour he does not know, and will punish him. The whole parable turns on a single phrase in the wicked servant's heart: my master is delayed. That is the lie that corrupts him. Because he believes the reckoning is far off, he begins to abuse his power and indulge his appetites, treating the delay as though it were an absence, mistaking patience for permission. The faithful servant and the wicked servant are given the same responsibility and the same uncertainty about timing. The difference is what they do with the waiting. One keeps doing his master's work faithfully, whether the master comes tonight or in 10 years, because his faithfulness does not depend on being watched. The other, the moment he believes no one is checking, reveals what was in him all along. This transforms the way you think about the unseen, unsupervised hours of your life, the long stretch of ordinary time in which no one is watching, and the reckoning feels far away. Character is what you do when you have convinced yourself the master is delayed. And the parable's warning is that the master always comes at an hour we do not expect, which means the only safe way to live is to be the kind of servant who is doing right not because the master is watching, but because faithfulness has become who you are. Parable 38. The growing seed. Jesus said, "The kingdom of God is as if a man should scatter seed on the ground, and should sleep and rise night and day, and the seed should sprout and grow. He knows not how. The earth produces by itself first the blade, then the ear, then the full grain in the ear. But when the grain is ripe, at once he puts in the sickle, because the harvest has come." This short parable, found only in Mark, contains a truth that brings deep rest to the anxious worker for God. The farmer scatters the seed, and then, this is the striking part, he sleeps and rises night and day, and the seed grows all on its own, and he does not know how. The growth is not his doing. He cannot make a seed germinate by force of will or effort or worry. He can prepare the ground and scatter the seed, and then he must quite simply trust the mysterious life inside the seed and the God who put it there. The earth produces by itself, automatically. The Greek word is the root of our word, automatic. There is a life in the seed and a power in the soil that operates entirely apart from the farmer's striving. And this transforms the way you think about spiritual growth, both in yourself and in those you love and pray for. So much of our anxiety comes from believing that everything depends on our effort, that if we do not force the growth, it will not happen, that the fate of every seed rests on how hard we work the field. Jesus says, "Scatter the seed faithfully, and then rest." There is a power at work that is not yours. The kingdom grows by a life you did not put there and cannot control, in the quiet dark of the soil, according to its own seasons, first the blade, then the ear, then the full grain, and the harvest will come. Your job is to sow and to trust. God's job is to grow. Parable 39, the householder's treasure. At the end of a long day of telling parables, Jesus asked his disciples, "Have you understood all these things?" They said to him, "Yes." And he said to them, "Therefore every scribe who has been trained for the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house, who brings out of his treasure things new and old." It is a small saying, easily overlooked, but it is Jesus describing what happens to a mind that has truly received his teaching. The trained disciple becomes like a householder with a rich storeroom, able to bring out treasures both new and old, able to hold the old truth of the scriptures and the new revelation of the kingdom together, not discarding one for the other, but drawing on both as the moment requires. This transforms the way you think about growth in understanding. The goal is not to accumulate new insights while throwing away everything old, nor to cling only to the old while refusing anything new. The mature mind, The one truly trained for the kingdom becomes a storehouse, old truths deepening, new truths arriving, all of it available, all of it treasured, all of it ready to be brought out and given to whoever has need of it. Every parable you take in, every truth you understand and keep, becomes part of that storeroom. And the purpose of the storeroom is not private hoarding, but generous distribution. The householder brings the treasure out to feed and serve others, new and old alike. Parable 40. The Salt of the Earth. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus said. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Salt in the ancient world did two essential things. It preserved food from decay, and it gave flavor. In a world without refrigeration, salt was what held back rot. It was precious, valuable, a preservative against corruption. And Jesus tells his followers, that is what you are to the world. You are the thing that holds back its decay. You are the flavor in an otherwise flat existence. You are a preserving, purifying, enlivening presence in a world that without you would slide further into corruption. But then the warning: salt can lose its saltiness. It can become bland, indistinguishable from the world around it, and once it does, it is useless for the one purpose it existed to serve. This transforms the way you think about the danger facing anyone who follows Christ. The great threat is not that the world will overpower you through open persecution. The great threat is subtler, that you will slowly lose your distinctiveness, blend in, become so much like everything around you that you no longer preserve or flavor anything at all. Salt that tastes like everything else is worthless. And a follower of Christ who has become indistinguishable from the world around them has lost the very thing that made them useful to it. The call is not to withdraw from the world, but to remain genuinely different within it, to keep your savor, to stay salt. Parable 41. The Wise Steward, watching for his master. Let your loins be girded and your lamps burning, Jesus said, and be like men waiting for their master to come home from the wedding feast, so that they may open the door to him at once when he comes and knocks. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. The image is of servants left in charge of a house while the master is away at a celebration, not knowing exactly when he will return. It could be the second watch of the night or the third, deep in the small hours before dawn. The faithful servants keep their lamps lit and their clothing ready, staying alert through the long dark so that whenever the knock comes, they can open the door at once. And then Jesus says something extraordinary and tender that transforms the whole image of what waiting for God is like. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake, he says. Truly, I tell you, he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them. Read that again. The master, returning to find his servants faithfully waiting, does not sit down and demand to be served. He girds himself, seats them at the table, and serves them. This is the God Jesus reveals, a master who, finding his servants faithful, becomes their servant, who rewards their watchfulness by waiting on them himself. The transformation here is in the very picture of God we carry. We expect that faithfulness earns us the privilege of serving him forever. Jesus says that faithfulness is met with a master who kneels and serves us. Stay awake, keep the lamp burning, wait faithfully through the dark, not because the master is harsh, but because the one who is coming is so astonishingly good that he will seat you at his own table and serve you with his own hands. Parable 42. The return of the unclean spirit. When the unclean spirit has gone out of a person, Jesus said, it passes through waterless places seeking rest. And finding none, it says, I will return to my house from which I came. And when it comes, it finds the house empty, swept, and put in order. Then it goes and brings 7 other spirits more evil than itself, and they enter and dwell there, and the last state of that person is worse than the first. This is a sobering teaching, and it addresses a danger that pure moral reform can never escape. Notice the condition of the house when the Spirit returns: empty, swept, and put in order. The person has cleaned up, they have reformed, they have swept out the old life and tidied everything. But the house is empty. Nothing has moved in to take the place of what was driven out, and an empty house, however clean, is simply a vacancy waiting to be filled, and what fills it is worse than what left. The transformation this works in your thinking is crucial because it corrects a mistake that sincere people make constantly. It is not enough to empty your life of what is wrong. Reformation is not the same as transformation. You cannot simply stop the old behavior, sweep the house, and leave it empty, because the human soul is not made to be empty. It will be occupied by something. If Christ does not fill the swept house, the old occupants return with reinforcements. The goal was never merely to be cleaned out. The goal was to be filled, occupied by the Spirit of God, indwelt, made into a home where the good has taken up residence so thoroughly that there is no vacancy for the old evil to reclaim. Do not just sweep the house. Invite the rightful owner to live in it. Parable 43. The two ways of the wise and foolish builder, revisited indeed Jesus, returned often to the difference between hearing and doing, and one of his sharpest images set it in the mouth of the final judgment. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, he warned, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. On that day many will say to me, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and cast out demons in your name, and do many mighty works in your name? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Depart from me. This is among the most frightening things Jesus ever said, and it is meant to be because it shatters a false security that many religious people rest in. The people rejected here are not atheists or open sinners. They are people who called Jesus Lord, who prophesied and cast out demons and did mighty works in his name. Impressive spiritual resumes, remarkable religious activity. And yet Jesus says, I never knew you. The problem was not a lack of activity. The problem was the absence of relationship. They knew about him. They used his name. They did things in his name. But he did not know them in the deep biblical sense of intimate, loving relationship, because they had never actually come to him, only worked for him. This transforms the way you think about what actually matters in the spiritual life. It is possible to be extremely busy for God and never actually know him. It is possible to build an impressive record of religious accomplishment on the foundation of sand. The one thing Jesus looks for is not the size of your ministry or the drama of your spiritual works. It is whether he knows you, whether there is a real relationship, a genuine doing of the Father's will, a heart that came to Christ himself and not merely to the benefits and platforms his name could provide. Depart from me, I never knew you, are words no one should risk hearing. And the way to never hear them is not to work harder in his name, but to actually know him. Parable 44. The children in the marketplace. To what shall I compare this generation? Jesus asked. It is like children sitting in the marketplaces and calling to their playmates, We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not mourn. It is a picture of sulking, contrary children who refuse to be pleased by anything. Their friends offer a happy game, flute music for dancing, and they refuse to play. Their friends switch to a different game, a funeral dirge for mourning, and they refuse that too. Nothing offered is ever acceptable. The problem is not the game. The problem is the heart that has decided in advance to be displeased. Then Jesus applied it with precision. John the Baptist came neither eating nor drinking, living an austere and severe life in the wilderness, and they said, He has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, joining feasts and befriending sinners, and they said, Look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. Do you see the trap? John was too austere. Jesus was too joyful. Whatever was offered, this generation found a reason to reject it. Their objection was never really about the style of the messenger. Their hearts had already refused the message, and they simply reached for whatever criticism was nearest to justify a rejection they had already decided on. This transforms the way you examine your own resistance. It exposes a particular dishonesty of the unwilling heart, the way it dresses up its refusal in reasonable-sounding objections that shift depending on what is offered. When someone is determined not to respond to God, they will always find a reason. The church is too strict or too loose, the preacher too serious or not serious enough, the faith too demanding or too easy. The objections contradict each other, which reveals that they were never the real reason. The real question is never whether God has offered his message in an acceptable form. It is whether your heart has already decided, underneath all the objections, to dance to nothing. Parable 45. The strong man bound. How can Satan cast out Satan? Jesus asked, answering those who accused him of driving out demons by demonic power. If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And then he gave the real explanation in a brief, powerful image. No one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man. Then indeed he may plunder his house. The picture is of a heavily guarded house, a strong man, armed, watching over his possessions, secure in his domain. You cannot simply walk in and carry off what he is guarding. There is only one way to plunder that house. Someone stronger must first come and bind the strong man, and only then can his goods be taken and his captives set free. Jesus is explaining what his ministry actually is. The strong man is the enemy, holding humanity captive, guarding his domain of sickness and bondage and death. And Jesus has come as the stronger one, entering the strong man's house, binding him and plundering his goods, which is to say, setting free the people the enemy held captive. Every healing, every deliverance, every rescued soul is an act of plunder, the stronger man carrying off what the strong man had claimed. This transforms the way you understand the spiritual reality behind your own struggles. You may feel held, bound, captive to things stronger than yourself, and on your own strength you cannot simply walk out of the strong man's house. But the whole point of the gospel is that one stronger than the one who holds you has come. He has bound the strong man, and he is in the business of plunder, of walking into the guarded house and carrying his people out to freedom. Parable 46. The unshrunk. Cloth and the cost of the new Jesus continually press the truth that what he brought could not be tamed to fit the old order, and he layered image upon image to make it unmistakable. We have seen the wineskins and the garment. He pressed the same truth again and again because the human tendency to domesticate God's new work is so persistent. The people around him kept trying to fit Jesus into their existing categories, to make him one more teacher, one more prophet, one more improvement on the religion they already had. And he kept insisting, "What I am bringing is not an addition to your system. It is not a reform of the old arrangement. It is new creation. Consider what this means for the way you approach your own faith." There is a constant temptation to treat following Jesus as a matter of adding him to a life that otherwise continues exactly as before, to keep the old self entirely intact and simply append some religious observance to the edges of it. But the whole thrust of these images is that the new cannot be contained by the old. You cannot keep your old center and add Jesus as a decoration. The new wine will burst the old skin. The new patch will tear the old garment. The kingdom Jesus brings is not a supplement to your existing life. It is a whole new life, and it asks not for a corner of you, but for all of you. The transformation is total, or it is not really transformation at all. Parable 47. The seed growing in secret toward harvest. We return once more to the mystery of growth, because Jesus returned to it, knowing how badly the anxious human heart needs to hear it. So much of the labor of faith feels invisible. You pray and see nothing change. You sow truth into a child, a friend, a stranger, and watch no immediate fruit. You work at your own transformation and feel, most days, exactly as flawed as you were before. And in that experience of apparent fruitlessness, discouragement grows like a weed, whispering that nothing is happening, that the effort is wasted, that the seed fell dead into the ground. Against all of that, Jesus sets the quiet confidence of the farmer who scatters seed and sleeps. The growth happens in the dark, underground, invisible, on a timetable the sower does not control and cannot rush. The blade appears long before the ear, and the ear long before the full grain. But every stage is real, and every stage is progress, even the long stretch when nothing shows above the soil. This transforms the way you interpret the seasons when your faith or your labor for God seems to be producing nothing. The absence of visible fruit is not the absence of growth. Beneath the surface, in the hidden places where God does his most important work, the seed is doing exactly what seeds do. Do not uproot it in despair to check whether it is growing. Keep watering, keep trusting. The harvest comes to those who do not lose heart in the long invisible middle where all real growth actually happens. Parable 48. The lowest seat at the table. Jesus noticed how the guests at a dinner chose the places of honor, and he told them a parable. When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, he said, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited, and the host come and say to you, give your place to this person, and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. On the surface, this reads almost like social advice, clever etiquette for climbing the social ladder gracefully. But Jesus is doing something far deeper than teaching table manners. He states the principle underneath it plainly, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. This is a fundamental law of the kingdom of God, running exactly counter to the law of the world. The world says, promote yourself, claim your place, take the high seat before someone else does, project importance and others will believe it. Jesus says the kingdom runs the other way. The path upward in God's economy runs downward first. Those who grasp at honor lose it. Those who freely take the low place are the ones lifted up. This transforms the way you think about your own hunger for status and recognition. The exhausting work of self-promotion, of jockeying for position, of making sure you get the credit and the honored seat, Jesus quietly reveals it as not only spiritually corrosive, but ultimately self-defeating. The one who seizes the high seat is heading for public embarrassment. The one who is content with the low seat is the one the host delights to raise. Stop clawing your way to the head of the table. Take the low place freely and leave the lifting up to the only one whose lifting up actually means anything. Parable 49. Inviting those who cannot repay. To the same host at the same dinner, Jesus turned and offered a second, harder word. When you give a dinner or a banquet, he said, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or your rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. For you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Jesus is dismantling the entire economy of transactional generosity, the invisible system of reciprocity that governs so much of human social life, where we give to those who can give back, Invite those who will invite us. Do favors for those positioned to return them. And quietly keep the whole ledger balanced. It feels like generosity, but it is really exchange. You are not giving, you are trading, investing in a return. And Jesus says, real generosity begins exactly where the possibility of repayment ends. Invite the ones who cannot pay you back, the poor who have nothing to give you, the outsiders who can add nothing to your status, the people from whom you will receive precisely nothing in return. That, Jesus says, is when giving becomes actual giving rather than disguised exchange. This transforms the way you examine your own kindness. It presses an uncomfortable question. How much of what I call generosity is really investment? How much of my giving is quietly aimed at people who can do something for me? The blessing Jesus promises is found in the giving that expects nothing back, the love poured out on those who cannot repay it, because that is the love that most resembles the love of God, who gave everything to those who could never possibly repay him, and who promises that what is given without expectation of return in this life is repaid in full at the resurrection of the just. Parable 50. The Tower and the King, counting the cost again. Jesus was so unwilling to gather half-committed followers under false pretenses that he returned to the theme of counting the cost with unusual bluntness. Great crowds were traveling with him. His popularity was at its height. And instead of flattering the crowd or softening his message to keep them, he turned and told them plainly how much following him would cost. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me, he said, cannot be my disciple. And then the paired images of the builder and the king, which we have seen, but here in their sharpest context. The crowds are large, the enthusiasm is high, and Jesus deliberately cools it, not because he does not want them, but because he does not want a following built on a misunderstanding. He would rather have a smaller number who know exactly what they are getting into than a great crowd of people who signed up in a burst of feeling and will abandon him the moment the road turns hard. This transforms the way you think about your own commitment. Genuine discipleship is not an emotional high, it is a considered decision, made with open eyes, that counts the cost in advance and chooses Christ anyway. The faith that lasts is not the faith that begins in the loudest excitement, but the faith that began by sitting down and honestly reckoning what it would cost, and then, having counted, chose to build the tower and fight the battle to the end. Jesus is not trying to thin the crowd out of harshness. He is trying to produce finishers, people whose faith is built to survive the day the feeling fades, because it was never built on feeling in the first place. Parable 51. The faithful use of little one who is faithful in a very little, Jesus said, is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will entrust to you the true riches? This is a principle Jesus returned to across many of his teachings, and it quietly reorganizes the way we think about the significance of small things. We tend to believe that faithfulness only really matters in the big moments, the major decisions, the public tests, the dramatic crossroads, and that the small, unwatched, ordinary choices do not much count. Jesus says the opposite. The way you handle a very little is the truest revelation of your character, precisely because no one is watching and nothing seems to be at stake. How you treat small sums of money, small responsibilities, small promises, small kindnesses, the small unseen duties of an ordinary day, this is where your real faithfulness is forged and displayed, and there is a promise embedded in the principle: the one who proves faithful in little is entrusted with much. God does not generally begin by handing us the great responsibility. He watches what we do with the small one. The person who is faithful in the tiny, hidden, unglamorous things is the person being quietly prepared for greater trust. This transforms the way you approach the unremarkable duties of your daily life. Nothing is too small to be done faithfully, because nothing is really small in the economy of God. The little things are the training ground and the proving ground, and the true riches, the weighty eternal responsibilities of the kingdom, are entrusted to those who were faithful when it seemed not to matter at all. Parable 52. No servant can serve two masters. No servant can serve two masters, Jesus said, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. The image is precise. Jesus does not say it is unwise to serve two masters, or difficult or inadvisable. He says it is impossible. A servant belongs wholly to one master. Divided ownership is not a real arrangement. And he names the specific rival master that competes with God for the human heart more successfully than any other. Money, mammon, the whole system of wealth and possession and material security that quietly asks for the total allegiance that belongs to God alone. Notice the psychology Jesus describes. It is not that you can serve one a little and the other a little, keeping both mildly satisfied. It is that the two make total and competing claims, and so you will inevitably come to love one and hate the other. When the moment of real decision comes, when God asks for something money says you cannot afford to give, or when money asks for something God forbids, your true master is revealed by which one you actually obey. This transforms the way you examine the quiet allegiances of your own heart. Most people do not consciously decide to serve money instead of God. They imagine they are serving both, keeping a comfortable balance. Jesus says there is no such balance. One of them is functioning as your true master, shaping your real decisions, holding your deepest trust and your ultimate sense of security. And the way to find out which is to notice which one you obey when the two finally give conflicting commands. Parable 53, the cost of discipleship and the plow. As Jesus set his face toward Jerusalem, various people declared their intention to follow him, and his responses reveal how seriously he took the commitment. To one who said, "I will follow you wherever you go," he replied, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Do not follow me imagining it will be comfortable." To another he said, "Follow me," and the man said, "Let me first go and bury my father." And to a third, who wanted first to say farewell to those at home, Jesus gave the piercing image, "No one who puts his hand to the plow and looks back is fit for the kingdom of God." Picture a farmer plowing. To cut a straight furrow, he must fix his eyes on a point ahead and keep them there. The moment he turns to look behind him, the line wavers and the furrow bends. A plowman who keeps glancing backward cannot do the work. And Jesus uses this to describe the divided heart that wants to follow him, while continually looking back over its shoulder at what it left behind. Longing for the old life, even while walking toward the new, never fully present to the road ahead, because half of it is still facing the road behind. This transforms the way you think about wholeheartedness. Jesus is not being harsh about family or farewells. He is describing a spiritual reality. You cannot plow a straight furrow into the kingdom while your gaze is fixed longingly on what you left. The backward look, the nostalgia for the old life, the constant second-guessing of the decision to follow, the divided attention that is never fully committed to the way ahead, makes a person unfit for the work, not because God is impatient, but because the work itself requires eyes fixed forward. The call is to put your hand to the plow and keep your eyes on the field ahead, trusting that what is behind you is not worth the crooked furrow that looking back would cut. Parable 54, the sign of Jonah. An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, Jesus said, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." The crowds kept demanding a sign, some spectacular proof, some undeniable miracle that would compel their belief without requiring any faith or repentance on their part. And Jesus refused to perform on demand. He offered them only one sign, the sign of Jonah, the prophet swallowed into darkness and death for 3 days and then brought out alive. Jesus was pointing forward to his own death and resurrection, the one sign that would be given, the descent into the heart of the earth and the rising again on the 3rd day. But there is a second edge to the sign of Jonah. Jonah was not only 3 days in the fish, he was also the reluctant prophet whose preaching, when he finally delivered it, caused the great pagan city of Nineveh to repent in sackcloth and ashes. And Jesus drew the comparison sharply. The men of Nineveh repented at the preaching of Jonah, and behold, something greater than Jonah is here. The pagans of Nineveh repented at a reluctant prophet's warning, while the people standing in front of Jesus, hearing the very words of God incarnate, would not. This transforms the way you think about the evidence you demand from God. The heart that will not believe is never really short of evidence. It is short of willingness. It always wants one more sign, one more proof before it will commit, and it would not be satisfied even by resurrection, as the whole history that followed proved. The greatest sign has already been given. The tomb is already empty. The question is not whether God has provided enough evidence. The question is whether we are willing to repent in the light of the sign already given. Parable 55, the divided kingdom. Every kingdom divided against itself is laid waste, Jesus said, and no city or house divided against itself will stand. He said it to refute the absurd charge that he cast out demons by the power of demons. For if that were true, the kingdom of darkness would be at war with itself and could not endure. But the principle reaches far beyond that argument into a truth about the destructive power of internal division wherever it takes hold. A house divided against itself cannot stand. The greatest threat to a kingdom, a community, a family, or a single human soul is very often not the enemy outside the walls, but the division within them. What topples a house is frequently not the storm without, but the split within, the internal conflict, the war between its own members or its own competing loyalties that hollows out its strength until it collapses under its own weight. This transforms the way you think about the divisions in your own life and world. It applies to the human heart perhaps most of all. For a soul divided against itself, pulled between two masters, torn between the old life and the new, wanting God and wanting what God forbids at the same time, is a soul at war with itself, and such a war is exhausting and, if never resolved, destructive. Jesus consistently calls his followers toward wholeness, toward integrity in the literal sense of being integrated, undivided, single-hearted. The undivided heart is the strong heart. The house united within itself is the house that stands. And the invitation running underneath the warning is toward that unity, to let the war inside be ended by giving the whole house, undivided, to a single rightful Lord. Parable 56. The eye as the lamp of the body. The eye is the lamp of the body, Jesus said. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? The image works on the way. Vision determines everything. The eye is the organ through which light enters. If the eye is good and clear, light floods the whole body, and a person can see and walk and live in the light. But if the eye is diseased or dark, then no matter how much light surrounds them, none of it gets in, and the whole body is left in darkness. What you take in through the eye determines whether you live in light or dark. Jesus is speaking about far more than physical sight. The eye here is the whole way you perceive and focus and value, the lens through which you interpret everything. If that inner eye is healthy, generous, single, fixed on God, then your entire inner world fills with light. But if that inner eye is bad, clouded by greed, by envy, by a grasping and divided focus, then your whole inner life fills with darkness, and most frighteningly, you may not even know it, because the very faculty you would use to detect the darkness is itself darkened. If the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? This transforms the way you attend to what you focus on and take in. Guard the eye. Be careful what you fix your gaze upon and what you allow to shape your seeing, because it is not a neutral matter. The health of your inner eye determines whether your entire being is filled with light or with a darkness so complete you can no longer even recognize it as dark. Parable 57, the faithful and the little flock. Fear not, little flock, Jesus said, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. Sell your possessions and give to the needy. Provide yourselves with money bags that do not grow old, with a treasure in the heavens that does not fail, where no thief approaches and no moth destroys. For where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. The tenderness of the address is the doorway. Little flock. Jesus' followers were few, vulnerable, without power or wealth or influence. A small and easily frightened flock in a world of wolves. And to them he says, fear not. Not because the dangers are not real, but because of who their Father is and what it is his good pleasure to give them, nothing less than the kingdom. The antidote to the fear of the vulnerable is the character of the Father who delights to give. And then the striking instruction about treasure, which contains one of the most piercing sentences Jesus ever spoke. Where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. Notice the order. We tend to assume the heart comes first, that we treasure what we already love. Jesus reverses it. Put your treasure somewhere, and your heart will follow it there. Invest in the kingdom, give to the needy, lay up treasure in heaven, and you will find that your heart migrates to where you have placed your treasure. This transforms the way you think about how the heart is actually changed. If you want your heart to be in heaven, the counterintuitive path is to send your treasure on ahead, to give, to invest in eternal things, and let your heart follow the trail your treasure has laid down. The direction of your giving quietly determines the direction of your loving. Put your treasure in the kingdom and watch your heart come to rest where it truly belongs. Parable 58. The wedding garment. We touched on the wedding garment within the parable of the wedding feast, but it deserves its own consideration because it addresses a question that troubles many sincere people. If the invitation is so wide, if the doors are thrown open to good and bad alike from the highways and hedgerows, does anything at all matter about how we come? The man without the wedding garment had come to the feast. He was inside the hall. He had accepted the invitation in some outward sense. But when the king came in to see the guests, he found this one man not wearing what the occasion required, and when questioned, the man was speechless. He had no answer, and he was cast out. The key, as we noted, is that wedding garments were provided by the host. To be without one was not a matter of poverty, but of refusal. The man had rejected the covering freely offered to every guest and presumed to come on his own terms, in his own clothes, as though the feast should accommodate him rather than the other way around. This transforms the way you understand the balance between grace and response. The invitation is pure gift. No one earns a place at the feast, and the doors are flung open to the undeserving. But grace is not the same as presumption. To come to God clothed in the covering he himself provides, the righteousness of Christ, freely given to all who will receive it, is to come rightly. To insist on coming in your own clothes, trusting your own merits, refusing the garment offered, is to reject the very grace that invited you while imagining you have accepted it. The feast is free. The garment is free. But you must actually put on what is freely given, rather than presuming to stride in wearing your own. Parable 59. The faithful watchman. Take heed, watch and pray, Jesus said, for you do not know when the time will come. It is like a man going on a journey, when he leaves home and puts his servants in charge, each with his work, and commands the doorkeeper to stay awake. Therefore stay awake, for you do not know when the master of the house will come in the evening or at midnight, or when the rooster crows, or in the morning, lest he come suddenly and find you asleep. The doorkeeper's task is singular and demanding, to stay awake and watch through the whole long night, not knowing which watch will bring the master's return. He cannot afford to reason, the master surely will not come in this next hour, so I may sleep a little, because the whole point is that the hour is unknown, and the return could fall in any watch, evening, midnight, cockcrow, or dawn. Wakefulness cannot be rationed to the hours we predict. It must cover them all. And what I say to you, Jesus concluded, I say to all, stay awake. This transforms the way you inhabit the ongoing present of your life. To stay awake is not to live in anxious dread of the Master's return, but to live in a settled, alert readiness. To be always the kind of person who would not be ashamed to have the Master walk in at this very moment. It is to refuse the spiritual drowsiness that assumes there is always more time, that the reckoning is always further off, that we can attend to our real faithfulness later. The call to watchfulness is a call to live each hour as though it genuinely matters, because it does. To keep the lamp lit and the work faithful and the heart awake, so that whether the Master comes at midnight or at dawn, we are found not sleeping, but ready. Parable 60. The two debtors and the measure of love, deepened. We return to the truth Jesus taught in Simon's house, because it is one of the great keys to the whole spiritual life, and it deserves to be pressed deeper. He who is forgiven little, loves little. Turn that sentence over and let its full weight rest on you, because it explains so much about why some hearts blaze with love for God, while others, equally religious, remain cool and dutiful and strangely unmoved. The difference is not, in the end, the actual size of the debt. For in truth, every one of us owes the 10,000 talents. No one's debt to God is small. The difference is in how much of your debt you have actually seen. The person who has come face to face with the true depth of their own need, who has stopped minimizing and excusing and comparing, who has looked honestly at what they have been forgiven, that person cannot help but love much, because the love rises in exact proportion to the forgiveness grasped. And the person who loves little is almost never a person who has genuinely been forgiven little. They are a person who has never let themselves see the size of what they owed. This transforms the way you understand your own coldness when you find it, and your own longing to love God more. The path to loving God more is not to try harder to manufacture feelings of love by sheer effort. It is to see more clearly and more honestly the depth of your own need and the staggering scope of the mercy that has met it. Love is the natural, spontaneous, unforced response of a heart that has truly grasped how much it has been forgiven. If your love feels thin, the remedy is not to squeeze harder for feeling, but to look longer and more honestly at the cross. Until the true size of the debt cancelled, there finally comes home to you, and love rises on its own. Parable 61. The seed and the soils, returning to the heart. Having walked through so many parables, we return, as Jesus intended us to the soils, because he said this was the parable that unlocks all the others, and now, near the middle of our journey, its meaning has deepened. Each of the stories we have received has been a seed, And the question the sower's parable presses is not, in the end, about other people. It is about the ground of our own listening. Consider honestly which soil you have been as these teachings have fallen. Have there been truths that landed on hard ground and were snatched away before they could root, because the heart was too packed down by cynicism or distraction to receive them? Have there been truths that sprang up with a rush of feeling, but found no depth, no root, no willingness to let the truth cost anything? Truths you were moved by for a moment and then forgot. Have there been truths choked before they could bear fruit by the thorns of worry and wealth and the endless desire for other things, crowded out by a life too full to let them grow? And have there been truths that fell, at last, on good ground, heard, understood, held fast, and beginning even now to bear fruit? This is the transforming power of the sower's parable. It turns the analysis around. It stops us from asking why the seed does not grow in others, and asks instead what kind of ground we ourselves have become. And the deepest hope of the parable, which we can now see clearly, is that soil is not fixed. The hard path can be broken up by the plow of honest sorrow. The rocky ground can have its stones dug out by a willingness to let truth go deep and cost something. The thorns can be pulled by a deliberate refusal to let lesser things crowd out the greatest. You are not condemned to be the soil you have been. The same word that could not root in you yesterday can bear 100-fold in you tomorrow, if the ground of your heart is broken open and made ready to receive it. Parable 62. The kingdom belonging to children. People were bringing little children to Jesus that he might touch them, and the disciples rebuked them, thinking the master had more important things to do. But when Jesus saw it, he was indignant and said, "Let the children come to me, do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God. Truly I say to you, whoever does not receive the kingdom of God like a child shall not enter it." And he took them in his arms and blessed them, laying his hands on them. Jesus deliberately holds up the little child as the model of how the kingdom is received. And it is worth asking exactly what quality of the child he means, because he is not praising childishness or naivety. He is pointing to the way a small child receives, with empty hands, with no achievements to present, with no pretense of self-sufficiency, with simple trust and open dependence. A child does not earn its place in the family. It simply belongs and receives everything as a gift and depends utterly and without embarrassment on the parent who provides. This transforms the way you think about how a person actually enters the kingdom of God. The adult instinct is to approach God the way we approach everything else, with a resume, with accomplishments, with a case for why we deserve to be admitted, with the pride of the self-made who want to earn their standing. Jesus says the door is shut to all of that. The kingdom is received like a child receives, by those humble enough to come with empty hands and simply trust, to accept what cannot be earned, to depend rather than achieve. This is not a lowering of the standard. It is the removal of the very thing the proud heart most wants to bring. You do not enter the kingdom by growing important enough to deserve it. You enter it by becoming small enough to receive it as a gift. Parable 63. The rich young ruler and the eye of the needle. A rich young ruler ran up to Jesus and knelt before him. "Good teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" He had kept the commandments from his youth, he said, and Jesus, looking at him, loved him. And then Jesus named the one thing the young man lacked. "Go, sell all that you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come, follow me." And the young man's face fell, and he went away sorrowful, for he had great possessions. This is one of the few times the Gospels record that Jesus looked at someone and loved him, and it was in that love that he named the hard thing. The young man was sincere, moral, religious, and successful. He had done everything right by every visible measure. But there was one thing that held his heart, one master competing with God, one treasure he could not let go of. And Jesus, loving him, put his finger precisely on it. He did not ask every follower to sell everything. He asked this man, because this was the thing that owned him. Then Jesus turned to his disciples and said, "How difficult it will be for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God. It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom." The disciples were astonished. In their world, wealth was assumed to be a sign of God's favor. And Jesus answered with the sentence that holds the whole hope of the passage, "With man it is impossible, but not with God, for all things are possible with God." This transforms the way you understand what stands between a person and the kingdom. It is not usually a great and obvious sin. It is more often a good thing held too tightly, a possession, a status, a security, a treasure the heart will not release. And the entrance is genuinely impossible by human effort. No one can pry their own fingers off their idol by willpower alone. But what is impossible for us is possible for God, who is able to do in a heart what the heart cannot do for itself, to loosen its grip on the treasure it clung to and free it to follow. Parable 64, the first and the last. Peter, having watched the rich young ruler walk away, said to Jesus, "See, we have left everything and followed you. What then will we have?" And Jesus assured him that no one who has left home or family or possessions for his sake will fail to receive back 100-fold, along with eternal life. But then he added the enigmatic warning, "But many who are first will be last, and the last first." This short saying runs like a thread through many of Jesus' teachings, and it is a direct assault on the human obsession with ranking. We are relentless rankers, always measuring who is ahead and who is behind, who is greater and who is lesser, where we stand in the order of importance and merit. And Jesus warns that the kingdom of God will overturn all our rankings. The ones assumed to be first, the wealthy, the religiously accomplished, the important, those confident of their high standing, may find themselves last. And the ones counted last, the poor, the overlooked, the sinners who came in from the highways, those who made no claim to any standing at all, may find themselves first. This transforms the way you hold your own sense of position, whatever it is. If you consider yourself among the first, spiritually advanced, morally accomplished, ahead of others in the race, this is a sharp warning against the pride that assumes its own high place, because that very confidence may land you last. And if you consider yourself among the last, unworthy, behind, disqualified, at the very back of the line, this is an extraordinary word of hope, because in the kingdom of God the last are not forgotten but frequently brought to the front. The lesson is to stop ranking altogether, to abandon the whole exhausting business of measuring your place against others, and simply to follow, trusting that the God who overturns all human rankings will set each one exactly where grace, not merit, determines. Parable 65, the 2 sons and the vineyard, deepened. We return to the 2 sons, the one who said no and went, and the one who said yes and did not, because the parable presses on a self-deception so common that it bears looking at twice. The danger it exposes is the danger of the second son, and the second son is the more religious of the 2. He is the one who says all the right words. "Yes, sir, I go." He offers no rebellion, no refusal, no offense, only agreement, compliance, the appearance of obedience. And then he does nothing. This is the particular trap of those who have been around religion for a long time. It is possible to become so fluent in the language of yes, so practiced at the right words, the right sentiments, the right public affirmations, that we mistake the saying for the doing. We say yes to God in 100 ways, in our worship, in our stated beliefs, in our verbal commitments, in the version of ourselves we present. And the whole time in the actual vineyard where the actual work is, we may not be present at all. The words have quietly become a substitute for the obedience rather than an expression of it. This transforms the way you examine the gap between your words and your life. Jesus' verdict is unambiguous. It was the Son who said no and went who did the Father's will, not the Son who said yes and stayed home. God is not honored by the yes we speak, but by the going we do. And the searching question the parable leaves with each of us is simply this: in the places where I have said yes to God, really said yes, sincerely, publicly, even movingly, have I actually gone into the vineyard? Or have I mistaken the warm feeling of having said yes for the costly reality of having obeyed? Parable 66. The wedding feast and the wide invitation. Deepened. The parable of the wedding feast holds a tension we must not resolve too quickly, because both halves of it are true, and we are always tempted to keep only one. On one side stands the breathtaking width of the invitation. When the first guests refused, the king did not cancel the feast or shrink the guest list to the deserving. He threw the doors open wider than anyone expected, sending his servants into the streets and lanes and out to the very highways and hedges, gathering in everyone they found, bad and good alike, until the hall was full. This is grace at its most scandalous. The feast filled with people who had no prior claim, no invitation by merit, nothing to recommend them except that they came when they were called. And on the other side stands the sober scene of the man without the wedding garment, cast out for presuming to come on his own terms. Both are in the same parable, and we must hold them together because our hearts always want to keep one and drop the other. Some want only the wide open door and no wedding garment at all. Grace without any response, an invitation that asks nothing and changes nothing. Others want only the garment and a narrow, deserving guest list, response without grace, a feast for the qualified. Jesus gives us both at once. This transforms the way you hold the gospel itself, which lives precisely in this tension. The invitation is wider than your worst fears. There is genuinely room at the feast for the people the world wrote off, for the ones who came in from the streets with nothing, for you at your most undeserving. And the invitation still calls for a response, for the garment freely offered but genuinely put on, for a coming that receives what the king provides rather than presuming on the king's hospitality. Many are called, the call goes out to all. And those who are chosen are those who came and who received the covering the king held out, rather than striding in on the strength of their own clothes. Parable 67. Watching for the thief in the night. But know this, Jesus said, that if the master of the house had known at what hour the thief was coming, he would not have left his house to be broken into. You also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an hour you do not expect. It is a jarring image, the coming of the Lord compared to the arrival of a thief in the night. But the point of the comparison is precise and singular. It is entirely about the unexpectedness of the hour. A thief does not send advance notice. He does not announce the night he will come. The whole danger, from the householder's point of view, is that the hour is unknown, and so the only defense is constant readiness, a watchfulness that does not depend on being able to predict the moment. This transforms the way you think about preparation and time. The human tendency is to procrastinate on the things that matter most precisely because their hour feels distant and unknown. To assume that because we cannot see the day coming, it must be far off, and that we will have time to get ready when we see it approaching. Jesus dismantles that assumption. The very unknowability of the hour is the reason for constant readiness now, not later. You cannot plan to get ready at the last minute because you will not be given notice of when the last minute is. The householder who thought he would deal with the threat when he saw it coming lost everything because the thief does not cooperate with our procrastination. The only safe posture is to be ready always, to live in such a way that no hour of the Lord's coming, however unexpected, would catch you unprepared. Parable 68. The talents and the fear that buries. We return to the servant who buried his 1 talent, because his failure is subtler and more common than the failures of the openly wicked, and it deserves a closer look. He did not steal the talent. He did not squander it in reckless living. He did not lose it through carelessness. By his own account, he preserved it perfectly and returned exactly what he was given. In the accounting of a cautious world, he did nothing wrong. And yet he was condemned, because in the economy of the kingdom, doing nothing with what you have been given is itself the wrong. And notice the root of his failure, which he confesses himself. I was afraid. His paralysis grew from a specific fear, and that fear grew from a specific misunderstanding of the master. He pictured a hard man, harsh and exacting and impossible to satisfy, and that distorted picture produced a fear that produced a burial. He was so afraid of doing the wrong thing that he did nothing at all, and nothing at all turned out to be the wrong thing. This transforms the way you think about the great, quiet danger of the fearful life. So many people never squander their gifts in any dramatic way. They simply bury them out of fear. Fear of failure, fear of risk, fear of getting it wrong, fear of a God they secretly imagine as a harsh accountant waiting to punish every mistake. And that fear leads them to play it safe, to take no risks, to bury the gift in the ground where at least it cannot be lost. And in doing so, to commit the one failure the master actually condemns. The parable presses a liberating truth. The master is not the hard man the fearful servant imagined. He is generous. He delights to reward even small faithfulness, and he would rather you risk the gift and stumble than bury it and stay safe. The great tragedy is not the servant who tried and fell short. It is the servant who was so afraid that he never tried at all. Parable 69. The rich fool and the illusion of tomorrow. We return to the rich man with his overflowing barns, because his particular foolishness is so quietly universal that most of the modern world would call it wisdom. He had a bumper harvest, and he made plans, sensible, prudent, forward-thinking plans. He would tear down his barns, build bigger ones, store up his surplus, and then relax into years of ease. By every worldly standard, he was doing exactly the right thing. And God called him a fool. The heart of his folly was a single hidden assumption, so deep he never even examined it, the assumption of tomorrow. He said to his soul, "You have ample goods laid up for many years, as though the years were his to count on, as though tomorrow were a possession he held securely. But he did not hold it. This very night, God said, your soul is required of you." The whole elaborate structure of his planning rested on a foundation of time he simply assumed he had and did not. This transforms the way you think about the future you are quietly counting on. The rich fool's error was not planning, and not even wealth. It was building his entire life on the presumption of a tomorrow that was never guaranteed, while giving no thought at all to the God before whom he would stand and the eternity for which he made no provision. He was rich toward himself and bankrupt toward God, and he ran out of time with the accounts in exactly that ruinous state. The parable does not teach us to stop planning. It teaches us to plan as people who do not actually own tomorrow, to hold our earthly future loosely, to be rich toward God first and above all, and never to build the whole meaning of a life on the one thing no one has ever been able to secure, the certainty of another day. Parable 70. The barren fig tree and the year of grace deepened. We return to the fig tree standing fruitless in the vineyard under the sentence of the axe, because the drama of that scene holds a mercy we should not pass over quickly. The owner's verdict was just 3 years of fruitlessness, precious soil wasted, cut it down. And into that just verdict stepped the vine dresser with his plea. Let it alone this year also, until I dig around it and fertilize it. Give it one more season. The whole gospel is compressed into that intercession, the just sentence and the merciful voice that pleads for more time and rolls up its sleeves to give the tree every possible help toward fruit. But we must not miss the other half, or we sentimentalize the parable into something Jesus did not say. The reprieve is real, but it is not unlimited. One more year, the vine dresser says, and if it still bears nothing, then you can cut it down. The grace is extraordinary, and the grace has a horizon. The extra year is not permission to remain barren forever. It is a gift of time given specifically so that fruit might finally come. This transforms the way you understand the patience of God, holding its two truths together without letting go of either. On one side, however fruitless your life may have been, however many seasons have passed with nothing to show, there is a voice interceding for you, pleading for more time, and actively working the soil of your life to help you bear fruit at last. The axe has not fallen. The extra year has been granted. Grace is real, and it is now. And on the other side, that grace is given for a purpose, and the purpose is fruit. And the season, though generous, is not endless. The mercy is not that fruit no longer matters. The mercy is that when you deserved the axe, a voice said, "Give it one more year," and then went to work on the soil around your roots. The only fitting response to a reprieve like that is not to waste it. Parable 71. The lost sheep and the heart of the seeker deepened. We return to the shepherd, leaving the 99 to search for the one, because there is a dimension of this parable we must not miss. It tells us not only that God seeks the lost, but what is in his heart as he seeks. The shepherd does not search grudgingly, as though recovering the stray were a tiresome obligation. When he finds the sheep, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. He carries it, spares it the exhausted walk home, and does the carrying with joy. And when he arrives, he cannot keep the joy to himself. He gathers his friends and neighbors to celebrate with him. This is the detail that transforms everything. The joy. We can too easily imagine a God who takes back the wanderer reluctantly, who receives the returning sinner with a cold and grudging tolerance, who lets us back in but never lets us forget the trouble we caused. Jesus paints the opposite picture entirely. The recovery of the one who was lost is not an annoyance to heaven, it is heaven's joy. There is more joy, Jesus says, in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents than over 99 who never strayed. Your return does not irritate God, it delights him. It sets off celebration in the halls of heaven. This transforms the way you think about coming back to God if you are one who has wandered. The lie that keeps many wanderers away is the belief that they will be received coldly, made to grovel, held at arm's length, reminded endlessly of their failure. Jesus says the truth is the reverse. The shepherd has been searching for you, and when you are found, he does not scold you and drive you home in disgrace. He lifts you onto his shoulders and carries you, rejoicing, and heaven itself throws a party at your return. Do not let a false picture of a grudging God keep you from the celebration that is waiting for your coming home. Parable 72. The two builders and the storm that comes to all. We return to the two houses in the storm because there is a detail in it that speaks with particular comfort and particular seriousness to everyone who has ever wondered why the faithful suffer just as the faithless do. Notice again, the storm comes to both houses. The rain, the floods, the winds beat against the house on the rock exactly as they beat against the house on the sand. Building wisely does not exempt you from the storm. The wise builder is not promised a life without weather. He's promised a house that stands when the weather comes. This is a truth that corrects a false and fragile faith. Some come to God expecting that faith will function as a shield against all hardship, that if they build rightly, the storms will pass them by, and that the arrival of suffering must mean something has gone wrong. Jesus makes no such promise. He promises the opposite of fragility, not the absence of storms. The floods will rise against every life. What faith secures is not immunity from the storm, but a foundation that holds through it. This transforms the way you interpret the hardships that come even to the faithful. When the winds beat against your house, it is not necessarily a sign of failure or divine displeasure or a foundation gone wrong. It may simply be the storm that comes to every house under heaven. The question the parable presses is not how to avoid the storm. No one avoids it, but what you are building on when it comes. And the answer, Jesus says, is startlingly practical. The difference between the house that stands and the house that falls is not the sincerity of the hearing, but the reality of the doing. The one who hears these words and does them has built without knowing it on rock, and will discover it precisely on the day the storm arrives, and the house, to their own quiet amazement, does not fall. Parable 73. The hidden treasure and the joy of losing everything. We return to the man who found treasure in a field and sold all he had to buy it, because the single most important word in that parable is one we can easily rush past: joy. In his joy, the text says, he went and sold all that he had. Not in his reluctance, not in his grim sense of duty, not in the sighing spirit of a man paying a heavy and regrettable price. In his joy. This one word overturns a whole mistaken picture of what it costs to follow God. Many imagine the Christian life as fundamentally a life of subtraction, a long series of sad renunciations, of pleasures given up and freedoms surrendered, and good things reluctantly laid down out of obligation. The whole thing shadowed by a quiet grief over everything one has had to sacrifice. But the man in the parable is not grieving, he is thrilled. He has done the arithmetic, and the arithmetic is not close. And selling everything he owns to buy that field is the easiest and gladdest transaction of his entire life, because what he is getting so immeasurably outweighs what he is giving up, that the giving up barely registers as loss at all. This transforms the way you think about the cost of the kingdom. Yes, following Christ costs everything. The parable does not soften that. The man sold all that he had. But when the treasure is truly seen, paying everything for it stops feeling like sacrifice and starts feeling like the best deal a person could ever stumble into. The problem, when the Christian life feels like nothing but joyless subtraction, is almost never that the price is too high. It is that we have not yet looked long enough at the treasure to see what we are actually buying. See the treasure clearly, and you will sell everything the way the man in the field did, not with a sigh, but with joy. Parable 74. The pearl and the single supreme value. We return to the merchant and his pearl, because alongside the man in the field, it teaches a truth the divided heart most needs to hear, that in the end there is one thing of supreme value, and finding it reorders everything else. The merchant had spent his life among pearls. He owned many, presumably, a whole collection of good and lovely and valuable things. But when he found the one pearl of surpassing worth, he sold all the others and everything else he owned besides to have it. The many good pearls were released for the sake of the one supreme pearl. This speaks directly to a particular modern difficulty. The difficulty not of choosing good over evil, but of choosing the best over the merely good. Most of us are not tempted to trade the kingdom for something obviously worthless. We are tempted to let the kingdom become one good pearl among many in a comfortable collection. One interest, one commitment, one compartment of a well-rounded life, held alongside career and comfort and family and a dozen other good pearls, none of them supreme, all of them balanced. And the merchant shows us something different, A life reorganized around a single supreme value, everything else held loosely and released gladly for the sake of the one thing worth more than all the rest combined. This transforms the way you think about the place Christ actually holds in your life. The question is not merely whether he is in your collection of valued things, but whether he is the one pearl for which you would release all the others. A kingdom held as one good pearl among many is not yet held as the merchant held his pearl. The invitation is to let it become the supreme value that reorders the whole collection, the one thing so surpassingly precious that everything else finds its proper lesser place in relation to it, and is gladly let go if ever it comes to competing with the pearl of great price. Parable 75. The net and the sorting at the end. We return to the great dragnet drawn up on the shore, because it holds a truth our anxious and impatient age badly needs. The sorting is real, but the sorting is not yet, and it is not ours to do. The net gathers fish of every kind. Good and bad come up together in the same haul, mixed and tangled, and they stay mixed until the net reaches the shore. Only then, at the end, do the fishermen sit down and separate the good from the bad. Two errors tempt us, and this parable corrects them both. The first is the impatience that wants to do the sorting now, to purge the mixture prematurely, to separate the good fish from the bad by our own judgment in the middle of the age, tearing at the net before it reaches the shore. Jesus consistently withholds that task from us. The sorting belongs to the angels at the end, not to us in the middle. The second error is the opposite. The cynicism that concludes, because good and bad are so thoroughly mixed and no sorting seems to come, that there will be no sorting at all, that it makes no ultimate difference which kind of fish one is. The parable refuses that too. The shore is coming. The separation is certain. It is simply not yet. This transforms the way you live in a thoroughly mixed world. It frees you from the exhausting and destructive compulsion to sort everything and everyone now, to render final verdicts that are not yours to render, to purify the net before its time. And at the same time, it steadies you against the cynical despair that says nothing will ever be set right, that good and evil will remain forever indistinguishable and unjudged, neither frantic sorting nor hopeless resignation. Instead, a patient trust that the net is in good hands, that the shore is real and approaching, and that the only question worth your energy now is not the sorting of others, but the simpler and more searching one. Which kind of fish, when the net is finally drawn in, will I be found to be? Parable 76, the unforgiving servant and the chain of mercy. We return to the servant forgiven 10,000 talents, who seized his fellow servant by the throat over 100 denarii, because the parable reveals a spiritual mechanism we cannot afford to misunderstand. Mercy received is meant to become mercy given, and mercy that refuses to flow through us has not truly been received at all. The servant had been forgiven an unpayable, incomprehensible debt, and moments later he refused a trivial one. The horror of the story is the grotesque disproportion, the same man in the same hour drowning in mercy and then denying a drop of it to someone who owed him almost nothing. The point is not that God's forgiveness of us is conditional on our performance in some transactional way. The point is deeper and more organic than that. Forgiveness, genuinely received, produces a forgiving heart, and a stubbornly unforgiving heart reveals that the forgiveness was never truly grasped. The servant's cruelty exposed the fact that whatever his lips had said, the enormity of his own pardon had never actually reached his heart. Had it reached him, had he truly felt the weight of the 10,000 talents lifted, he could not possibly have clutched at another's throat over 100 denarii. This transforms the way you understand your own struggles to forgive. When you find forgiveness of another impossibly hard, and some wounds are terribly real, and the struggle is not to be minimized, the parable gently redirects you. It sends you back, first, not to grit your teeth and manufacture forgiveness by willpower, but to look again at the size of your own pardon until the 10,000 talents cancelled in your favor comes home to you with such force that the 100 denarii owed to you finally shrinks to its true proportion. The refusal to forgive is very often a failure to remember how much we ourselves have been forgiven, and the flow of mercy through us to others is the surest sign that the mercy of God has actually reached the depths of us and not merely wetted the surface. Parable 77, the Good Samaritan and the redefinition of neighbor. We return to the road from Jerusalem to Jericho, because the deepest transformation of this parable lies in the question Jesus refused to answer, and the question he asked instead. The lawyer asked, "Who is my neighbor?" And every one of us understands the instinct behind it, because it is the instinct to draw a line, to establish the boundary of obligation, to determine who is inside the circle we are required to love and who is safely outside it. It is a question designed, however respectably, to limit love. And Jesus would not answer it. He told the story of the man in the ditch and the priest and the Levite who passed by and the despised Samaritan who stopped. And then he turned the lawyer's question completely around. He did not ask which of these was the wounded man's neighbor, as though neighbor were a category to be identified. He asked which of these proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell among robbers. The lawyer wanted to know whom he was obligated to love. Jesus told him to stop asking who qualifies and to start becoming the kind of person who loves without checking whether the other qualifies. This transforms the way you think about the reach of love. Neighbor, in Jesus' hands, is not a limited set of people who have met some condition to earn your compassion. Neighbor is what you become when you show mercy to whoever is in front of you, especially the one you would naturally pass by, especially the one on the other side of every division that gives you a reason not to stop. The priest and the Levite had every religious reason to keep walking. The Samaritan had every ethnic reason not to stop. And it was the Samaritan who fulfilled the law of love, because love in the kingdom of God does not first ask whether the person in the ditch is on my side of the line. It simply crosses the road and binds the wounds. Go, Jesus said to the lawyer, and to us, go and do likewise. Parable 78, the prodigal and the father who runs. We return to the Father on the road, because in all of Scripture there may be no single image that transforms our picture of God more completely than this one. The Father, seeing his ruined son while he was still a great way off, running. We have noted that a dignified man of that culture did not run. Running meant gathering up the robe and baring the legs and moving with the undignified haste of a servant or a child. Fathers did not run. And this father ran toward the son who had wished him dead, who had squandered the inheritance, who was returning in disgrace with a rehearsed speech and the smell of the pig pen still on him. Consider what the running means. It means the father was watching the road, had been watching day after day, scanning the horizon for a silhouette that might be his boy. It means that when he saw him, he did not wait, arms crossed, for the son to complete the long walk of shame up to the house and grovel out his apology. He ran to close the distance himself. He reached the son before the son could finish his prepared confession, cut off the speech about being made a servant, and called instead for the robe and the ring and the feast. The son came home hoping to be received as a hired hand. The father received him as a son who had never stopped being a son. This transforms the way you picture God's posture toward the returning heart more powerfully than almost anything else Jesus said. So many carry an image of a God who waits for the wanderer with folded arms and a cold stare, who demands the full and groveling apology before granting a grudging and probationary acceptance, who will let you back but never let you forget. Jesus shatters that image completely. The God he reveals is a father scanning the road, who sees you while you are still far off, who runs to meet you, who interrupts your rehearsed unworthiness with an embrace, and who calls for a celebration before you have even finished explaining yourself. If you are on the road home, however far off you still are, look up, the Father is already running. Parable 79, the elder brother and the sin that we excuse. We return to the elder brother standing in the dark of the yard, refusing to go in, because his is the sin that respectable, faithful, religious people are most likely to commit and least likely to recognize in themselves. The younger son's sins were obvious: the wild living, the squandered inheritance, the far country. But the elder brother's sin is quiet, and it wears the clothing of virtue. He had stayed, he had worked, he had obeyed, and in all his obedience a hard resentment had been growing that revealed he understood the Father no better than his brother once had. Listen again to what he says. "These many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command." He describes his life in the Father's house as servitude, years of service, of rule-keeping, of earning, not as the relationship of a beloved son. He had lived as a hired hand in his own father's house, and now, watching grace lavished on his undeserving brother, the resentment boiled over. He was scandalized that the father would celebrate a son who had not earned it, because he himself had been trying to earn everything all along. And grace to another felt like an insult to his own careful bookkeeping. This transforms the way the dutiful and the faithful must examine their own hearts. It is entirely possible to never leave the Father's house and still not understand the Father at all. It is possible to keep every rule and harbor a heart that is cold, resentful, and secretly convinced that God's love must be earned and that grace to the undeserving is an offense. The Father's reply is the gentle correction every elder brother needs. "Son, you are always with me, and all that I have is yours." Everything the elder brother was straining to earn had been his the whole time, freely, as gift. If only he had received it as a son instead of laboring for it as a servant. And Jesus leaves the ending open, the invitation still hanging in the night air, because the elder brother in every religious heart still has a choice to make: to keep standing in the yard, nursing the grievance of the deserving, or to lay down the exhausting ledger and go in at last to the feast where grace, not merit, sets the table. Parable 80, the mustard seed and the patience of small beginnings. We return to the smallest of seeds, because its lesson is one the impatient and the discouraged need to hear again. Do not despise the day of small things. The mustard seed was proverbially tiny, and Jesus deliberately chose it to describe the kingdom of God, which in his own day looked like almost nothing, an itinerant teacher and a handful of ordinary followers, with no power, no institution, no army. Nothing that the watching world would have bet on to endure. And from that seed came something that outlasted the empire, that killed its founder and spread to shelter the whole world in its branches. The principle reaches all the way down into the smallest realities of your own life. We are trained to despise smallness, to assume that if a thing is small, it is insignificant. If a beginning is humble, it is doomed. If progress is slow, it is failure. And under that assumption, we grow discouraged by the small seed of faith we carry, the small and unnoticed act of obedience, the quiet prayer that seemed to change nothing, the tiny and unimpressive beginning of some good thing that we abandon because it did not immediately become large. This transforms the way you regard the small beginnings in your own life and faith. The kingdom of God does not generally arrive full-grown and obvious. It arrives as a seed, small, hidden, unimpressive, easy to overlook and easy to despise. But inside the seed is a life you cannot see, and that life is not in a hurry, and it does not need to look impressive to be real. The tiny seed of faith The small, faithful act, the humble and unnoticed beginning, do not despise it. You may be looking at a mustard seed and you have no idea yet what God intends to grow from it. The smallness of a true beginning is never a reason for contempt. Given time and the life God has hidden inside it, the smallest seed becomes the greatest of shrubs, and the birds of the air come and find shelter in its branches. Parable 81, the leaven and the slow. Transformation of the whole, we return to the woman hiding leaven in the meal, because its quiet lesson answers a discouragement that the mustard seed does not quite reach. The mustard seed speaks of growth that eventually becomes visible and great. The leaven speaks of transformation that stays hidden and works from within. The yeast is buried in the dough, invisible, and it makes no show of its working. And yet, it does not rest, and it does not skip any portion of the dough, and it will not stop until the whole batch is transformed through and through. This is precisely how God's transforming work so often proceeds in a human life, and understanding it brings deep relief to those discouraged by their own slow progress. When God begins His work in you, it very often does not announce itself. There is no lightning, no overnight remaking of your whole character, no dramatic and total change you can point to. There is only leaven hidden in the ordinary dough of your days, working quietly and invisibly through your thoughts and reactions and desires and habits. And it can be so gradual that on any given day you cannot see it working at all. This transforms the way you interpret the slowness of your own transformation. The absence of dramatic, visible change is not the absence of change. The leaven does not work all at once, and it does not work where you can watch it. It works secretly, permeating one part of the dough and then the next, until in time there is no portion of the whole left untouched. If you feel that God's work in you is impossibly slow, that you are the same person you were, that nothing is happening, this parable answers gently, slow is not stopped, and hidden is not absent. The leaven is in the dough. It is working even now, in the places you cannot see, and it will not rest until the whole of you is transformed. Parable 82. The persistent widow and the God who is not reluctant. We return to the widow hammering on the door of the unjust judge, because the parable is built on a comparison we must read correctly, or we will draw exactly the wrong picture of God. The judge is unjust. He neither fears God nor respects man. He helps the widow at last, only to be rid of her nuisance. If we read the parable as a simple likeness, God is like this judge, so keep pestering him until he relents, we badly misunderstand it. Jesus is arguing not from likeness but from contrast, from the lesser to the greater. Hear what the unjust judge says, Jesus urges, and then draws the contrast wide open. If even a corrupt judge, who cares nothing for justice and nothing for the widow, will finally grant her request simply because she will not stop coming, how much more will a good and loving God, who cares infinitely for his own children, grant justice to those who cry to him day and night? The point is not that God, like the judge, is reluctant and must be worn down. The point is the opposite. God is nothing like the judge. If persistence prevails even on the unjust, how much more surely will it be heard by the just and loving Father who is eager to answer? This transforms the way you understand persistence in prayer, and especially the seasons when the answer is delayed. Jesus tells this parable, Luke says plainly, so that we would always pray and not lose heart. And the whole burden of it is that delay is not denial, and silence is not refusal. Do not read the waiting as evidence that no one is listening, or that God, like the reluctant judge, must be nagged into caring. Read it instead as the occasion for the kind of persistent, unwearying faith that keeps coming to a Father who is not reluctant at all, who is more eager to give than we are to ask, and who will surely, in his own perfect time, bring about justice for those who cry to him and do not give up. Parable 83. The Pharisee and the tax collector, and the prayer God hears. We return to the two men praying in the temple, because between them lies the whole difference between a prayer that reaches God and a prayer that never rises above the one who prays it. The Pharisee's prayer was, on its surface, thanksgiving. God, I thank you. But every word bent back toward himself, his fasting, his tithing, his superiority to the extortioners and adulterers, and above all, to that tax collector over there. He asked for nothing because he felt he needed nothing. His prayer was a monologue of self-congratulation with God's name attached, and it never left the room. The tax collector, standing far off, would not so much as lift his eyes. He beat his breast and prayed 7 words, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. No comparison, no resume, no achievements offered as currency. Only an honest confession of need and a naked appeal to mercy. And Jesus delivered the verdict that must have stunned his hearers. This man, the despised collaborator, went down to his house justified before God, and the other, the respected religious man, did not. This transforms the way you come to God in prayer. The one thing that seals a heart shut against grace is the conviction that it does not need any. The Pharisee could not receive mercy because he did not think he required it. His fullness left no room for the gift. The tax collector received it because he came empty, and empty hands are the only hands that can be filled. It is a fixed principle of the kingdom, which Jesus states outright. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and the one who humbles himself will be exalted. Do not come to God with your inventory of virtues, measuring yourself against those you consider beneath you. Come as the tax collector came, with no claim but your need, no plea but for mercy, and go home, as he did, justified. The prayer God delights to answer is not the proud recitation of the worthy, but the honest cry of the one who knows he is not. Parable 84. The sheep and the goats and Christ hidden in the least. We return to the great scene of the final judgment, because its most transforming revelation is where the king says he was to be found all along. He does not commend the sheep for their theology, their eloquence, their religious achievements, or their spiritual experiences. He commends them for the simplest and most concrete things imaginable. They fed the hungry, gave drink to the thirsty, welcomed the stranger, clothed the naked, visited the sick and the imprisoned. And when they are baffled, when did we ever see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison? The king reveals the secret that reorders everything. As you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. This is a truth that changes the way you see every human being who will ever cross your path. The king has hidden himself in the least, in the hungry, the poor, the sick, the imprisoned, the stranger, the overlooked and the discarded. The person the world steps over is the very one behind whose face Christ is somehow present, so that what you do or fail to do for them, you do or fail to do for him. And notice that the sheep did not know it. They did not feed the hungry as a calculated strategy to serve Christ and earn reward. They simply loved the person in front of them, and only at the end discovered whom they had been serving all along. Their compassion was real, unself-conscious, unaware of its own significance. This transforms the way you regard the suffering people around you. It closes forever the gap we like to keep between loving God, whom we cannot see, and loving the inconvenient human being in front of us, whom we can. Jesus fuses them. The love of God is enacted precisely in the concrete mercy shown to the least. You cannot claim to be serving a Christ you never see while ignoring the Christ who is hidden in the hungry and the imprisoned and the stranger at your door. And so the final judgment, in Jesus' telling, turns not on the grandeur of our religious performance, but on what we did with the suffering person right in front of us, in whom, though we did not know it, the King himself was waiting to be loved. Parable 85. The watchful servants and the master who serves. We return to the servants waiting through the night for the master's return, because tucked inside this parable of watchfulness is one of the most astonishing pictures of God in all the teaching of Jesus, and it deserves to be seen on its own. The call itself is clear. Keep your lamps burning, stay dressed and ready, be like servants alert for the master's knock, however late it comes, in the second watch or the third, so that whenever he arrives, you can open to him at once. That much we expect. But then Jesus says the thing that turns the whole picture inside out. Blessed are those servants whom the master finds awake when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he will gird himself, have them sit down at table, and come and serve them. The master, returning to find his servants faithful, does not take his rightful seat and command them to wait on him. He ties on the servant's apron himself, seats them at his own table, and serves them with his own hands. It is very nearly beyond belief. The Lord waiting on those who waited for him. This transforms the very picture of God we carry into our watching and our waiting. We might imagine that faithfulness earns us, at best, the privilege of serving God forever, that the reward for good service is more service. Jesus reveals something else entirely, a master so astonishingly good that he responds to his servants' faithfulness by kneeling to serve them. This is the God we are waiting for, not a harsh taskmaster tallying our failures, but a Lord who delights in his faithful ones and honors their watchfulness by becoming unimaginably their servant. Stay awake then, and keep the lamp burning through the long dark, not out of dread, but because the one who is coming is so good that to open the door to him is to be seated at his table and served by his own hand. Parable 86. The sower. One last time, and the soil you will become. We return a final time to the sower and his seed, because this was the parable Jesus called the key to all the others, and now, near the end of our long walk together, it presses its question on us with everything the intervening stories have added to its weight. 90 times the seed has been scattered across the soil of your hearing. 90 stories, 90 images, 90 truths cast into the ground of your heart. And the sower's parable has been quietly asking the entire time the one question that determines what any of it will come to. What kind of soil are you? You know the foregrounds now as well as you know anything. The hard path where the seed cannot penetrate and is snatched away. The rocky shallows where it springs up fast and dies for lack of root, the thorny ground where it grows but is slowly choked by worry and wealth and the crowding press of lesser things, and the good soil that hears and understands and holds fast and bears fruit with patience, 30, 60, 100-fold. The seed has been the same in every case throughout this whole teaching. The only variable from first to last has been the ground, and here is the final transformation, the hope that has been hidden in this parable from the beginning. Your soil is not fixed. This is the most important thing the sower's parable has to say to you as our journey closes. You are not sentenced to remain the ground you have been. Hard paths can be broken open by the plough of honest repentance. Stony hearts can have their rocks dug out by a willingness to let the truth go deep and cost something real. Thorns can be pulled up by the deliberate daily choice to refuse the lesser things, a place they were never meant to hold. The ground of a human heart can be changed, and that is the whole reason these 90 seeds were scattered. Not merely to inform you, but to break you open and make you ready, so that the word which once fell on hard or shallow or crowded ground might finally find, in you, the good soil where it takes root and holds and bears, at last, the 100-fold harvest it was always meant to bring. Parable 87. The wise householder bringing out treasure, old and new. We return to the trained scribe of the kingdom, the householder who brings out of his storeroom treasure both new and old, because this small saying describes precisely what should be happening in you now, at the end of so much teaching. Every parable you have received has become a piece of treasure laid up in the storeroom of your heart. The old truths and the new have been gathered together, the ancient wisdom of the sower and the mustard seed and the lost sheep. Alongside the deeper and freshly seen dimensions each has opened as we turned it in the light a second and a third time. The mature heart, Jesus says, becomes like a well-stocked storeroom, able to reach in and bring out exactly the treasure a given moment requires. A word of comfort for the grieving, a word of warning for the complacent, a word of patience for the discouraged, a word of hope for the one far down the road home. The purpose of the storeroom is never private hoarding. The householder brings the treasure out to feed and to serve. What has been given to you was given to be given again. This transforms the way you think about everything you have received in this long teaching. It was never meant merely to be admired and filed away. It was meant to become living treasure in you, old and new, held together, available, ready to be brought out at the moment of need, for yourself and for others. As you go from here, you go as a householder with a fuller storeroom than you had before. Reach in often. Bring out the treasure old and new, and give it away as freely as it was given to you, for that is what the treasure of the kingdom is for. Parable 88, the lamp meant to be seen. We return to the lamp that is not lit to be hidden under a basket, but set on a stand to give light to the whole house. Because as our teaching draws toward its close, this image turns from instruction into commission. You have received light. Through these parables, through this long and unhurried walk among the teachings of Jesus, light has entered. And Jesus is unambiguous about what light is for. It is not lit to be hidden. It is not given to be kept. It is set on a stand precisely so that it may give light to everyone in the house. The temptation, once the teaching ends, is to let the light stay private, to be quietly warmed by it, comforted by it, and to keep it tucked safely inside, under the basket of self-consciousness or fear or a false humility that shrinks from being seen. But a hidden lamp betrays its whole purpose. The light was never meant only for the one who carries it. It was meant to fall on the faces of others still sitting in the dark, to help them find their way, and above all, to lead them to glorify not the lamp, but the God who is its source. This transforms the way you think about carrying forward what you have received. Let your light shine before others, Jesus said, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. The purpose of the shining is not your own reputation, but the Father's glory and the illumination of those still in darkness. What has entered you through these teachings was not given to be hoarded in the dark of your own private comfort. It was given to be set on a stand and to shine openly, humbly, generously, so that others might find in its light the way home and give glory to the one who lit it. Parable 89, the great banquet and the excuses that keep us away. We return, as our journey nears its end, to the great banquet and the strange spectacle of people invited to a feast who simply will not come. Because the reasons they gave are the very reasons that still keep hearts from the kingdom today, and they are worth naming one last time. "I have bought a field," said the first, "and must go see it. I have bought 5 yoke of oxen," said the second, "and must examine them. I have married a wife," said the third, "and therefore I cannot come." Not one of them refused because of some great wickedness. They refused because of property and work and family, ordinary, legitimate, good things that had quietly grown large enough to crowd out the one invitation that mattered most. This is how the kingdom is most often missed, not through dramatic rebellion, but through the slow, respectable tyranny of good things allowed to take the place of the best. The field and the oxen and the marriage are not sins. That is precisely the point and the danger. It is fatally easy to let a life fill so full of good and legitimate concerns that when the king's invitation comes, there is simply no room left for it, no seat unoccupied, no evening free. And so the feast is refused, not with a defiant no, but with a distracted and apologetic one. Please have me excused. This transforms the way you examine what actually competes for your heart. The question the parable leaves with each of us is not whether we are choosing some obvious evil over God, but whether we are letting good things fill every seat at the table until there is no place left for Him. The Master's response is sobering and clarifying. The ones too busy to come do not taste the banquet, and their places are filled instead by the poor and the outsiders, who had nothing to hold them back, and came gladly when they were called. The invitation is still open. The feast is still spread. The only question is whether you will let the good things of your life quietly excuse you from the best thing of all, or whether when the servant comes and says everything is ready, you will set the good aside and come. Parable 90, the two ways, and the house that stands. We come at last to the 90th teaching, and it is fitting that we end where Jesus Himself ended His greatest sermon, with two roads, two builders, two houses, and one storm that comes to all. He set before His hearers a plain and unavoidable choice, and having received 90 of His teachings, we now stand exactly where those first hearers stood, facing the same choice they faced. There are two ways, Jesus said. One gate is wide, and its road is broad and easy and crowded, and it leads to destruction. The other gate is narrow, and its road is hard and little traveled, and it leads to life. And there are two builders. Both hear His words. This is the crucial thing. Both hear, but one hears and does, digging deep and building on rock, and the other hears and does not, building quickly and carelessly on sand. And then the storm comes, as it comes to every life without exception. The same rain and floods and wind beating against both houses. And the house on the rock stands, and the house on the sand falls, and great is its fall. This is the transformation to which all the others have been leading, and it is the most important of all. The whole weight of these 90 teachings comes down in the end, not on whether you have heard them, but on whether you will do them. It is possible, and this is the sober warning with which Jesus chose to close His sermon, and with which we close ours, to hear every word, to be moved by every parable, to admire the wisdom and feel the beauty, and follow every turn of every story, and still to build your house on sand, because hearing was never what He asked for. Doing was. The one who hears these words and does them is the one building, often without even knowing it, on rock that no storm can bring down. So this is where we leave you, not merely having heard, but standing before the choice to do. The storms will come to your house. Jesus promises they will come to every house, and He does not pretend otherwise. But a life built on these words, actually built on them, actually enacted and obeyed and lived, is a house founded on rock, and when the rain descends and the floods rise and the winds blow and beat against it, it will not fall. Hear these words then, and do them, and build on the rock that holds, a life that stands. And so we come to the end of our long walk together through 90 of the parables and teachings of Jesus, 90 seeds scattered across the soil of these hours, 90 windows opened onto the kingdom of God, 90 invitations to think in an entirely new way about God, about yourself, and about the whole shape of the life you are living. If you have stayed to the end of this journey, I want you to know how glad I am that you did. And I do not believe it was an accident that these particular words found you on this particular day. Somewhere in these 90 stories, there was a word meant for you, a truth that landed, a sentence that lodged in your chest, a story that seemed to know you better than you expected to be known. Do not let it slip away with the ending of the video. Carry it with you. Turn it over. Let it do its slow, quiet, transforming work in the good soil of a willing heart. And before you go, let me ask one last thing of you. the one thing that matters most as you leave. If any of these teachings has stirred something in you today, would you subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so that the next teaching finds you when it comes? There is so much still ahead of us. More parables to walk through slowly, more of the words of Jesus to sit with and be changed by, more long and unhurried journeys into the depths of Scripture and the heart of God. I would hate for you to miss what is coming, and subscribing is completely free. A single tap and your place here is kept. And if it is not too much to ask, give this video a like and share it with one person who came to mind as you listened, so these words can reach one more weary heart that needs them. And then, in the comments below, tell me, which of these 90 teachings did you most need to hear today? Which one lodged itself in your heart and would not let go? Write it down, both so that I can know, and so that someone scrolling past your words might find in them the very thing that turns their own day toward God. Now receive this blessing, spoken over you as you go. May the words of Jesus that you have heard today not remain only in your mind, but travel down into the deep places of your heart, into the very ground of who you are. May the seed that was sown in you find good soil, take deep root, and bring forth a harvest of a changed life, 30, 60, 100-fold. May you no longer merely hear these words, but do them, and so build your house on the rock that no storm can shake. And may the God who runs down the road to meet every returning heart, who searches until he finds the one that is lost, and who hides himself in the least of these so that every act of love becomes a gift laid at his feet, may that God keep you, transform the way you think, and hold you fast in his love today and all the way home. Go in peace.